Before I go on, we say that, as some of you may know, at the OSCE High Commission on National Minorities, we are in a bit of a special situation at the moment, as we do not have a High Commissioner at the present time. Astrid Thors ended her mandate on the 20th of August, and the participating states are in a process of identifying who will be the next High Commissioner for National Minorities. Meanwhile, I'm in charge of the institution, and the work continues unabated in most fields, I want to assure you. Back to today. This year is a special one. It marks the 20th anniversary of the annual OSCE Human Dimension Implementation Meeting. In fact, it was back in 1992 that the Helsinki document first mandated the OSCE Office for Democratic Institution and Human Rights, ODIHR, to be the main institution responsible for the OSCE human dimension of security and to organize a meeting to review the implementation of human dimension commitments entered into by all OSCE participating states. It was also in 1992 at the Helsinki summit that the participating states agreed to establish the High Commissioner on National Minorities. In its preamble, the Helsinki Declaration explains that these decisions were driven by an overriding concern at the time that aggressive nationalism, intolerance, xenophobia, and ethnic conflicts threatened stability in the then CSCE area, as well as a concern that gross violations of CSCE commitments in the field of human rights and fundamental freedoms, including those related to national minorities, pose a special threat to the peaceful development of society. The declaration also acknowledges the value of diversity and the need to respect and protect it, emphasizing that there is still much work to be done in building democratic and pluralistic societies where diversity is fully protected and respected in practice. Today, almost 25 years later, the challenges identified in 1992 not only still exist, but have also taken on new dimensions. In some contexts, they've even become more acute, thus making, from our perspective, the work of the High Commissioner on National Minorities as relevant and urgent as ever. Serving as an early warning and an early action mechanism, the High Commissioner on National Minorities has often seen how ignoring the rights of persons belonging to national minorities can increase tensions and, in the worst-case scenario, erupt into full-blown conflict. The robust implementation of human dimension standards, including those related to the rights of minorities, was identified by the High Commissioners from the outset as one of the key ingredients needed to effectively prevent ethnic or ethnically motivated tension or their instrumentalization. That's why this annual review conference organized by ODIHR is so important for the High Commissioner on National Minorities, us being a conflict prevention mechanism. This year, we are here to discuss the implementation of the right to access, disseminate, and exchange information in the languages of national minorities without discrimination. National minorities express, protect, and develop their identities and preserve their cultures through communication, where media in their own language is often the main vehicle of such communication. At the same time, the media of the majority and the media from abroad often play an influential role. For this reason, they are also important factors that have an impact on the identity of national minorities. The effect of media influence is that it can foster either inclusion or exclusion. It can be a tool for manipulation and hate-mongering, or a platform for dialogue and compromise. It can be a breeding ground for stereotypes, or it can help to break them and expose them for what they are. Moreover, the new media and communication tools may be operating even faster than that we are used to. There are also continued debates about the role of the state in regulating the media, and today these discussions are no longer confined to broadcast media alone. As many of you know, the High Commissioner has embarked on updating and expanding the guidelines on the use of minority languages in the broadcast media, which we published in 2003, and which built on this human dimension commitment to safeguard the right to access, disseminate, and exchange information in the languages of national minorities without discrimination. The rationale behind this revision is not only to give advice to the participating states on how to ensure access to information to national minorities in their own languages in the rapidly developing technological landscape of the media, but also to offer the High Commissioner's recommendations on the role of the media in diverse society, especially on how to counter narratives when national minorities are depicted in the media as a security threat. In view of that, these updated guidelines, which we hope to be able to publish in the year that comes, will have a much wider scope than the original 2003 document. In addition to the linguistic dimension, the document will focus on the media's contribution to the integration of diverse societies and thereby to conflict prevention. It's a logical step for us to expand the recommendations on this matter, not only because technology has developed much, as you will agree, since 2003, but also it's a natural step following the identification of the media that we addressed in our Ljubljana guidelines on the integration of diverse societies, which we published in 2012. The work on updating the media guidelines started under the former High Commissioner on National Minorities, Astrid Thors, who paid a close attention to the role of the media in diverse societies. Currently, we are holding consultations with all interested stakeholders on the structure and main developments of this document. The meeting today is an opportunity to continue this discussion with the OSCE participating states, with civil society representatives, all of you who are here today, including obviously organizations representing national minorities. So we have a, let me say, rather selfish interest in the outcome of this meeting, in the sense that we hope to take something home to the Hague from the exchange that we will have today, that we can include in our work on updating our media guidelines. Therefore, I encourage you to take this opportunity to contribute your views on the topic of today's discussion with the wider focus on the role of media in diverse societies. I am well aware that I've taken significantly more than the 2 minutes that Lorenzo obligated me to abide by. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor, through the moderator, obviously, to Professor Tom Mooring, who sits beside me and who participated in the elaboration of the 2003 guidelines and who's one of the leading experts in the field. I'm sure you'll enjoy listening to him. He will share his perspective on how national minority voices are represented in the modern media and in particular, what issues are at stake if we want to make our diverse societies more stable and inclusive. Thank you for your time. Sorry for overstepping mine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Willotson. Without further ado, I'd like to pass the floor to Professor Tom Mooring. I will just briefly introduce Professor Mooring. Professor Mooring is a professor of communications and journalism at the Swedish School of Social Science at the University of Helsinki, Finland. Professor Mooring's research and publications focus on minorities and the media, broadcasting, and political communication. He has a background in Finnish public service broadcasting as a journalist, director of the Swedish radio programs, and the chair of board in a newspaper company. He was Secretary General of the European Bureau for Lesser Used Languages and has served as a member of the Committee of Experts of the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages. He was also one of the experts, as Mr. Willotson has mentioned, who were consulted in the preparation of the OSCE guidelines on the use of minority languages in the broadcast media. Professor Mooring, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dr. Willotson. It is indeed an honor to address such an important forum on a matter that today is ever more urgent. I have been professionally involved in the media sector for more than 40 years. Never before in my life I have experienced such interesting and important changes as we see today. this is really a time worth living and experiencing, and what we do will make a difference. It makes you think when research shows that in all Nordic countries, between 6 and 8 hours a day is allotted to media. The British Ofcom a year ago, or a little bit more than a year ago, issued a research showing that the most media savage generation, which is the 18 to 24 years old, would pack 16 hours of media use into 9 hours of daily time. So it is, of course, of immense importance how this time is used. And as the theme here relates to languages and minority languages, languages of national minorities, an immediate reflection is that the idea to maintain this type of communication in support of the languages and those communities where these languages are spoken is essential, although it today is more and more challenged in the digital realm. And this will be one of the main points of my presentation. I will group my speech around 3 main points. First of all, the importance of media for communication, also relating to conflict prevention within and between societies. Then the importance of media for the national minorities in the light of the digital developments, and a little bit more about what we know now that the digital developments mean for the use of minority languages on this side of the media sector, the news side, that is the one that those people who are, for most of us, the generation of our children, how they go about and use the media and where they are growing up and what will be their future if something is done and if something is not done. Then I will finalize by discussing a little bit what can be done, what do we know, and what perspectives do we have on what can be done. And this could, of course, then maybe be a first reflection from my part on how the new developed guidelines could take up on some current strands that are today of great importance. Let me start with a reference to the Ljubljana Guidelines on Integration of Diverse Societies from 2012 that Dr. Wilhelmsen already mentioned. Its Article 48 states that state policies should aim to promote and facilitate the capacity and awareness of the media to reflect and respond to the diversity within their societies, including by promoting intercultural exchange and by challenging negative stereotypes and prejudices, and in other ways countering intolerance. In this document, the role of the media is outlined in the following way, and I find this to be a very useful outline. The media perform 2 important roles in the process to integrate societies. First, they provide a key forum for persons belonging to minorities to exercise their rights, including their rights to use their language and promote their culture. Second, as tools for receiving and transmitting information, the media are essential to foster a climate that is conducive to intercultural dialogue and mutual understanding, including by countering negative stereotypes, prejudices, and intolerance in society. End of quote. We know from communication research that deliberation between stakeholders that hold different views may lead to consensus. We also know that this deliberation may lead to further polarization. With the emergence of social media, we have experienced more contact than ever before within and between cultures. We have also seen a dramatic increase in often anonymous hate speech. In some instances, the public sphere has divided into smaller spherules. the common dialogue that involves the entire society may be more difficult to maintain today. The famous writer of satiric songs, also professor of mathematics in Harvard University, Tom Lehrer, is known to have said, "People complain that they cannot communicate. If they cannot communicate, the least they can do is to shut up." I disagree. One thing is clear beyond doubt. Lack of communication and communicative isolation will certainly deepen the cleavages between people and within and between states. And when we today are facing more diverse publicities forming several public spheres, it is important to understand their positive potential as well. By allowing and enhancing the formation of communities that can formulate common collective views, we can arrive at more organized and constructive dialogue in society. Against this background, it is important to also stress the following passage of the Ljubljana Guidelines, quoting, "State policies should promote intercultural exchange in the media and challenge negative stereotypes and intolerance. Media policies, self-regulatory frameworks, and licensing regimes should aim to create an enabling environment for an independent and pluralistic media conducive to the communication of ideas and information that reflects and is responsive to the needs of different communities." The Bolzano-Bosen recommendations on national minorities in interstate relations, this was issued in 2008, focus mainly on how states may support minorities residing in other countries, or how this kind of kin-state relation can be developed. The free reception of transfrontier broadcasts, says these recommendations, whether direct or by means of retransmission or rebroadcasting, may not be prohibited on the basis of ethnicity, culture, language, or religion. Limitations are restricted to broadcasts that use hate speech or incite violence, racism, or discrimination. In 2013 in Vienna, the OSCE representative on freedom of the media organized a conference on shaping policies to advance media freedoms in the age of the internet. An important lesson from this meeting was that the internet and web-based media are today part and parcel of our world and must operate under the principles of freedom of expression. This would, as I see it, mean that where hate speech or other harmful or illegal activities emerge, also on the digital media, on the web, they should be subjected to legal consequences not under restriction of media freedoms, but under normal criminal law. Acts should be deemed as acts of violence wherever they emerge, but this should not lead to further or any restrictions in this regard of the media freedoms that we all are fostering together. The Ljubljana Guidelines specify some further important principles here. In Article 49, it notes that measures to promote the state or official languages in the media should not disproportionately curtail the right to use a minority language. And this is then specified to mean, among other things, that the potential of new technologies to facilitate the reception of programming in minority languages that have been produced in other, often neighboring countries, should be recognized and may be encouraged as appropriate. However, they should not substitute locally produced programs in minority languages. I repeat this. However, they should not substitute locally produced programs in minority languages. Many of these principles have been tabled by OSCE already in 2003 in the guidelines on the use of minority languages in the broadcast media that is now under particular discussion. However, today there is a need for an abridged and updated version that responds to the dramatic changes in the media world. Here I would make reference to an article written by my colleague Tala McGonigal in 2013. It is written under the title Freedom of Expression of Minorities in the Digital Age, Staking Out a New Research Agenda, and it was published in 2013 in the Journal on Ethnopolitics and Minority Issues in Europe, Volume 12, number 4. And I would also point to our research together in this field, where we have come to that the optimal aim is a media ecology that caters for democratic process in the following ways, at least. For the society to offer as institutionally complete media services as possible to all its members, including national minorities, securing their cultural and linguistic functionality, and for the national minorities to involve themselves with issues of importance for full participation in the societies where they live, whilst developing their own culture and language. I particularly want to point to that this obligation goes two ways. The changes in the media world today show the emergence of a monopolized global mass media market in the distribution of social media. The five big are Facebook, Baidu, Yahoo, Microsoft, and Alphabet. In 2015, they got 65% of the digital advertising market, according to Zenit Optimedia and their statistics. Traditional media that earn their revenues from the market have fallen back in most European countries, in more advanced economies faster than in less advanced economies, but the trend is clear. Young people are not anymore sufficiently reached by the media that are maintained by those instruments that states have traditionally installed to maintain media diversity in the market, press subsidies, franchise programming on commercial television, and first and foremost, public service broadcasting. The average age of these media is growing, and it's growing like 1 year every year. In my capacity as a professor of journalism, I have been fostering young journalists for more than 25 years. Today what I see is that we are teaching young people to produce journalism for an audience whose average age is around 60. The young have found other ways to orient themselves in the communication environment. We, as policymakers, must take responsibility for securing a rich and diverse content also for this young audience. And of course, in this context, the national minorities and the young people who are speaking minority languages are the most vulnerable. Against the backdrop of predictions of linguistics or linguists who have studied the likely development of minority languages in the digital age, I'm referring to an article by Andras Kornai in 2013, the development is seriously critical. According to his estimates, only less than 5% of the world's languages will survive the digital shift. That is 250 to 350 of the 7,000 languages or so that we have in the world today. This is a dramatic change. In a digitized media environment, the inclusion of minorities requires that state parties adapt their systems for minority media supports to content production in the digital media outlets. And this all points to the urgency of the OSCE to update its policies in this field. Whilst developing the policies in this field, it is important to recognize that the objectives defined in the existing broadcasting guidelines from 2003 are still of great importance. Broadcasting for national minorities need to be supported as a state obligation in order to offer nationals with different backgrounds, information, opportunity to deliberate, and media presence within the state. At the same time, we must not forget the importance to maintain open borders between states with overlapping minorities. And here I come back to a question I already touched upon. The work that is ahead meets several challenges. Some are of the nature to avoid mistakes. Others are of the nature to find good practices and solutions to difficult problems. Among the mistakes we can see today, one of the most harmful is to try to substitute traditional media services to national minorities with web-based services and dramatically reduce the services on traditional media platforms. this is not uncommon. Among the positive measures that could form the backbone of restitutive measures to counter the demise in media services for national minorities, the following could be mentioned. First and foremost, to secure funding for production and sustaining production of competitive media contents for national minorities and in their languages, both in the public service and in the commercial sectors. Second, to secure findability and access, meaning measures that assist in maintaining a broader visibility and public presence of the contents that are produced by and for minorities, including in their languages and for their cultures. Such would be electronic program guides, also must carry principles and must offer rules on cable networks and other regulated media services. Third, to encourage the national minority communities to develop and maintain social media networks along with curating of news and other media contents. This can spread through a two-step flow where active peers take a guiding role. In all these measures, it has proven to be effective that they work for the integration of not only national minorities, but also more broadly integrating young people who risk to fall outside the deliberation that is essential to democratic process. Summing up, we live in a world that has truly become a global village. But even though so much is available, we have a local presence. Media experts talk about globalization. Today, open dialogue is more than ever in the interest of the state, as well as in the interest of its national minorities. This includes the need for society to allow contacts over borders and the need for society to support media that respond to the local dimension. It is essential for us policymakers to understand the challenges that a web-based media system confronts us with and to readily react in order to meet these challenges. The alternative is massive disintegration with all its political and social consequences. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Professor Moring, for this very interesting introductory speech. Ladies and gentlemen, we now open the floor to speakers from the audience. I was informed by ODIHR colleagues that today we have a record number of registered speakers, over 40. Therefore, we have to limit the number allocated per speaker to 2.5 minutes, and we were asked to be strict with following the time schedule. The speakers list will still be open for 5 minutes as of now. If anyone still wishes to register, please do so with the ODIHR colleagues seated behind us. The general order for the speakers will be that we follow the order of the speakers as they have been registered. Following that, the delegations of OC participating states will have the right of reply towards the end of the session. Each speaker and each participant can only take the floor once, and when taking the floor, you are kindly asked to briefly present yourself by stating your name and your organization. In general, we hope to have open, constructive, and active discussions. If you have any prepared statements, you are invited to submit them to the documents distribution system so that they are recorded as such. This being said, we now open the order for the speakers with the Netherlands on behalf of the European Union, to be followed by the order of St. Andrew. Netherlands, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. I'm honored to speak on behalf of the European Union, and so far we have received alignments to the statement from Montenegro, Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Liechtenstein, and Norway. The European Union welcomes Director Wilatsen and Professor Moring to this HTIM, and we thank them for their presentations. We would like to take this opportunity to thank Ms. Astrid Thors for all the work done in fulfilling the mandate of the High Commissioner on National Minorities over the last 3 years. We look forward to a speedy appointment of a new High Commissioner. The European Union recommends that participating states meet the commitment made by all OSCE participating states without exception to fully cooperate with the High Commissioner in order to enable the High Commissioner to fulfill its mandate. This includes granting HCNM full and free and unrestricted access. We recommend that participating states extend an invitation to the H&M and make full use of the expertise of this institution. Quiet diplomacy, which the High Commissioner also implements, is complementary to public diplomacy and can help to bring results of lasting importance. We recommend that persons belonging to national minorities should be able to exercise fully and effectively their human rights and fundamental freedoms without discrimination and in full equality before the law. Mr. Chairperson, the European Union strongly believes that protection of human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to national minorities, is crucial for maintaining regional peace and stability. The European Union considers the office and the mandate of the High Commissioner to be of utmost importance for the OSCE concept of comprehensive security. This autonomous institution is and should remain a core conflict prevention instrument for the whole OSCE area in providing early warning and seeking early actions with regard to tensions involving national minorities. The European Union attaches great importance to the work done in the areas of education, including in multilingual and integrated education, effective participation of persons belonging to national minorities in public life, and policing in multi-ethnic societies. We commend the High Commissioner particularly for activities regarding these issues. We look forward to other thematic work foreseen for the near future, such as access persons belonging to national minorities to justice and the updating of the 2003 guidelines on the use of minority languages in broadcast media. Mr. Chairperson, we welcome the H&M's engagement in regard to the crisis in and around Ukraine. We have repeatedly expressed our concern about the deteriorating human rights situation on the Crimean Peninsula, in particular about the precarious position of both the Crimean Tatar and Ukrainian-speaking communities after the illegal annexation of Crimea and the city of Sebastopol by the Russian Federation. Full compliance with international human rights standards and other obligations under international law must be ensured. We are deeply concerned that the de facto authorities on the illegally annexed Crimean Peninsula have so far not accommodated requests from the High Commissioner to facilitate a visit to Crimea. We reiterate that the H&M and other international human rights actors should be granted full, free and unrestricted access to the whole territory of Ukraine, including Crimea and the city of Sebastopol. We support the High Commissioner's engagement in the Western Balkans, promoting long-term stability and the ongoing activities in Eastern Europe, the Caucasus and Central Asia, in particular concerning language issues. We would like to mention here just a few examples of this engagement: the strong involvement of the Office with issues that concern persons belonging to national minorities in the ongoing process of political and legislative reforms in Ukraine, the continuous engagement with the Republic of Moldova on integration in society of persons belonging to minorities, while protecting minority languages and cultures, and the monitoring of the situation of the Latin script schools in the Transnistrian region. Implementation of a multilingual education system in Georgia, as well as protection of the universal right to education in the Georgian breakaway region of Abkhazia, and the review of the Ohrid Framework Agreement in the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. To conclude, Mr. Chairman, we once again express our full support for the office, the mandate and autonomy of the High Commissioner, and we reiterate the importance we attach to the protection of the rights of persons belonging to national minorities. We look forward to fruitful discussions and reinforced commitment by all participating states in the field of protecting these rights. I thank you very much.
Thank you. We now offer the floor to the Order of St. Andrew, to be followed by the delegation of the United States of America.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Constantine Karras. I'm a member of the National Council of the Order of St. Andrew. The three issues which the Order of St. Andrew highlights, again, are the same: Halki Seminary, confiscation of property, and interference in the election of a new patriarch. Halki Seminary. The Turkish government forced the Halki Seminary to close in 1971, and it still has not allowed the school to reopen, despite repeated requests to do so by world leaders and even by the Muslim president of the Religious Affairs Directorate. We again ask for the reopening of the Halki Seminary. 2. Confiscation of property. In 1936, the Ecumenical Patriarchate and its institutions owned 8,000 parcels of property. Today, that number is down to 500, mostly churches and other non-income producing property. The property has been lost through the years due to overt government decrees and confiscatory taxes, in violation of Turkey's obligations under the Treaty of Lausanne. We ask for the 2011 decree promising a return of confiscated property to be reopened and administered fairly. And 3, election of new patriarchs. Local Turkish law requires that ecumenical patriarchs and the hierarchs who elect them must be Turkish citizens. The Ecumenical Patriarchate agrees that ecumenical patriarchs will become Turkish citizens after election if they are not already Turkish citizens, but there is no reason why an Orthodox hierarch must be a Turkish citizen simply in order to cast a vote in the election of a new ecumenical patriarch whose mission is worldwide. The order asks that the government of Turkey refrain from interfering in the internal affairs of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. In closing, I report that this year a new issue unfortunately has surfaced as the government accelerates its policy of converting historic former Christian places of worship, currently maintained as museums, into mosques, notwithstanding that there is no need for additional mosques in the area. The order requests that the government desist from this practice as it is an impediment to harmony among religious groups. Thank you.
Thank you. We now offer the floor to the delegation of the United States of America, to be later followed by the Western Thrace Minority University Graduates Association.
Thank you, moderator. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, agreements regarding ethnic power sharing formalize discrimination. Returnees face intimidation and discrimination. We urge Croatian authorities to condemn aggressive nationalist views against Serbs and other minorities. The presence of government ministers at the unveiling of a monument to an extremist sends the wrong message. We applaud Kosovo for changes to ensure minority students are eligible to attend public universities. We urge implementation of agreements reached via the EU-led dialogue talks. In Macedonia, the political crisis requires a renewed commitment to the Ohrid Framework Agreement. We urge Kyrgyzstan to stop charging ethnic Uzbek clerics with terrorism. In Russia-occupied Crimea, Tatars are subjected to unjust detentions, kidnapping and torture, and arbitrary searches of their homes, schools, and places of worship. Tatar leaders languish in pretrial detention. Ibrahimov has been missing since May. Umerov faces criminal charges for affirming the fact that Crimea remains part of Ukraine. Members of other communities, including ethnic Ukrainians, are also targets for discrimination. Ethnic Georgians face restrictions on their freedoms in the occupied South Ossetia and Abkhazia. Latin script schools remain limited in separatist Transnistria. We commend the Moldovan Parliament's decision to establish a joint working group with the People's Assembly of Gagauzia. We also commend Georgia's state strategy for equality and integration and call for the full implementation of the country's state language law. Russia's policies and actions concerning ethnic Russians in other states are dangerous. We should express our legitimate concern for the rights of persons belonging to national minorities in other countries, but without ethnic bias, inflammatory rhetoric, or destabilizing intent. We underscore the importance of maintaining the independence of the High Commissioner on National Minorities and ODIHR. Thank you very much, and we'll have a longer version to publish as well.
Thank you, sir. We now offer the floor to the Western Thrace Minority University Graduates Association, to be later followed by the delegation of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Pervin Hayrullah. I'm representing the Turkish minority of Western Thrace here. I would like to underline some of the Greek violations of the established minority and human rights of the Turks of Western Thrace very briefly. The ethnic identity of the Turkish minority is still being denied. The minorities' historic associations were closed because of their titles, including the word Turkish, despite the European Court of Human Rights decisions in favor of the minority. The reopening or establishment of new associations with Turkish within their titles is not permitted. Between 1955 and 1998, under the implementation of the Greek Citizenship Code, Article 90, 60,000 Turkish minority members lost their Greek citizenships. No steps have been taken to eliminate the loss of minority individuals affected by the application of Article 19. For many years, laws against the autonomous structure of the Turkish minority of Western Thrace education have downgraded the level. In Western Thrace, almost half of the population is Turkish. However, there are only 4 minority secondary and high schools in relation to 109 state secondary and high schools, although a need and attempts new schools have not been allowed to open. Every school can choose in its head teacher. However, in minority schools, head teachers are not elected but appointed. Minority schools are closed immediately in the absence of a sufficient number of students. However, in some areas, despite an adequate number of children, the opening of minority schools are not permitted. Permission has not been granted for bilingual kindergartens. The 3% electoral threshold is undemocratically applied to independent candidates. Therefore, minority cannot be freely represented with independent candidates in the Greek parliament. Use of minorities' mother tongue Turkish is still prohibited in the public domain. Therefore, Mr. Moderator, we call upon the OSCE participating states to monitor Greek implementations of the OSCE commitments. We would like to repeat once more that we will be honored if a fact-finding mission of OSCE High Commission on National Minorities pay a visit to Western Thrace. And we will call upon the Greek state to have a concrete and constructive dialogue with the Turkish minority representatives. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I was asked to announce that the speakers list is now full and has therefore been closed. This being said, we now offer the floor to the delegation of the Russian Federation, to be later followed by the Federation of Western Thrace Turks in Europe.
Спасибо.
Thank you. My name is Gunnar Mead, and I represent our National Minorities Commission. Mr. Moderator, dear colleagues, in connection with what we have heard from the office in charge of the High Commissioner for National Minorities, Office of the OSCE, we note that not all the potential and possibilities of this institution have been taken advantage of to deal with the full spectrum of problems relating to national minorities. Given the growing migration risk and terrorist threat, there is an intensification of intergroup and interfaith relations in many participating states of the OSCE. The British Independent Commission on Equality and Human Rights has noted that there has been quite a serious surge in crimes based on racial intolerance. People of African descent, for instance, are 3 times more likely to be victims. So there is more and more difficulty with access to higher education and other services. In Canada, there's a problem with Amerindians. For instance, in Atavapiskat, we have seen since the beginning of the year more than 100 attempts at suicide and more than 1,100 cases of disappearance of women and girls, not to mention, of course, long-standing social and economic inequalities. What about member states of the EU, for instance, Latvia and Estonia, where statelessness is a phenomenon that is very serious for the last 2 decades? The access to information for these individuals is being limited under the pretext of combating so-called Russian propaganda. Various methods are used, for instance, limiting the time for retransmission of Russian channels and imposing fines supposedly to combat disinformation from a neighboring state. There are even limitations on the written press, literature, and songs in the Russian language. But this is not an isolated case. Similar problems can be seen in Lithuania for people of ethnic Polish origin. They have difficulty in being educated in their own language or even writing their names in their own language. And as we can see, adding these new problems to the old problems is resulting in an intensification of the conflict potential. We must do away with a dual standard. We cannot accept a politicization of these issues. Unfortunately, there is an impression that in the executive structures of the OSCE, we are behind on the work being done by other international organizations. We very much hope that the future High Commissioner for National Minorities will do away with geographic blindness, will not apply dual standards, and will give a new impetus to strengthening the standards for the defense of the rights of national minorities in the OSCE region. Thank you for your attention.
I offer the floor to ABTTF, the Federation of Western Thrace Turks in Europe, to be later followed by the delegation of Kyrgyzstan.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Melek Kirmacı, ABTTF.
The exercise of the right to disseminate and exchange information in mother tongue is essential for national minorities to preserve and develop their identities and maintain culture. As ABTTF, we are shocked by the news that our colleague, Mr. Mustafa Kaymakçı, the president of the Rhodes, Kos, and the Dodecanese Turks Culture and Solidarity Association, which is an NGO registered to the OEC but couldn't make it today. Mr. Mustafa Kaymakçı was arrested and kept under detention in Kos at the end of August while he was doing research for a new project based on the decision that he is prohibited to enter Greece on the grounds that he poses a threat to public order. The surprising news is that he was arrested 3 days later in Rhodes, where he entered Greece from Kos. He was released only after he signed a document that he will not sue the Greek authorities. That's why he is not here today with us. Concerning the minorities in Greece, the only recognized minority in Greece is the Turkish minority, whom the Greek authorities do not recognize its identity, but rather recognize the minority as Muslim minority in Thrace. Although the Turkish minority is granted educational and religious autonomy under the Lausanne Treaty, the government has wide-ranging control at all levels of education. Let me give an example from the preschool education. All the minority children are obliged to attend public kindergartens where the instruction is only in Greek, under a law adopted in 2006. And the requests for the establishment of minority kindergartens or private bilingual ones are dismissed. And the learning and the use of the mother tongue in early childhood is very important during transition to school. In spite of growing evidence and parents' demand, Greece continues to ignore the need for the establishment of minority kindergartens or private nurseries. We call upon Greece to restore the educational autonomy of the Turkish minority, and we request from the Greek authorities to establish bilingual minority kindergartens and allow them to establish private nurseries in the region. Thank you.
Thank you. We now offer the floor to the delegation of Kyrgyzstan, to be later followed by the delegation of Turkey. Kyrgyzstan, you have the floor.
Chairman, participants, the main aim to achieve of the OSCE is ensuring the human dimension of security and ensuring human rights, taking this into account the fact that on the 20th of September 2016, there was in the Kyrgyz Republic was this man was assessed as a criminal not only by Kyrgyzstan, but by others. And he carried out particularly egregious crimes on the basis of religious hatred. We would like to inform you that Kajaban Batyrov on the 20th has been sought by the bodies of Uzbekistan under articles of the Criminal Codex of Kyrgyzstan for fraud. Citizen Batyrov was also handed a warrant by the Russian Federation under the article of the 11th article of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation. This shows that this professional fraudster and entrepreneur has been playing the race card for his own interests, has hidden behind human rights, and has used the OSCE as a tribune and to work against the democracy in Kyrgyzstan. The people are outraged that this person has spoken at the OSCE. This provocation, providing a platform to him and those like him, has negative consequences. It increases the temperature in the community, and it undermines the process of ensuring good community relations. This has shown that the format of holding this current meeting requires a review urgently, and the Minister of the Foreign Affairs of Kyrgyzstan, Mr. Dubdayev, met with the Secretary General of OSCE, Mr. Lambert, in New York. Mr. Zanier apologized and said that he would look at this issue. However, today, in this hall, we can see them covered by the name of an unknown educational institution. We believe it's a provocation, and our delegation will have to review the issue of its participation in the organization. This provides a platform to criminals. Today, we will have to abandon the work of this meeting if they are given the floor. And this statement is provided in English and in Russian.
Thank you. We now offer the floor to the delegation of Turkey, to be followed by the Islamic community in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Turkey, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to begin by thanking Director Willitsen and Professor Moring for the insights they shared with us in their introductory statements. Of course, under usual circumstances, the High Commissioner on National Minorities himself or herself would have been addressing us during this working session. We regret that this has not been possible this year and hope that the ongoing appointment process of the new High Commissioner will be concluded as soon as possible. The ongoing restrictions of human rights and fundamental freedoms in Crimea have been raised in many sessions of this year's HDM. Turkey remains concerned by the continuing deterioration of the situation of minority groups in Crimea, particularly the plight of the Crimean Tatars. Various sources, including the reports of the Human Rights Assessment Mission on Crimea, published jointly by ODIHR and the High Commissioner on National Minorities, highlight the increasing pressure on the Crimean Tatars. They bring to our attention the many cases of expulsion, incarceration, intimidation, and disappearance involving prominent members of the Crimean Tatar community, including legislators and journalists. This year's banning of the Crimean Tatars' legitimate representative body, the Mejlis, is a further example of the measures being directed against the institutions and media outlets of this peaceable indigenous people. We will certainly continue to closely follow developments in Crimea with a particular emphasis on the security and well-being of the Crimean Tatars. We also continue to expect the OSCE and its institutions to remain seized of this matter with all their assets and their unfettered access to the peninsula to be finally ensured. Finally, in light of certain interventions we heard last week during various working sessions, we feel the need to emphasize that Turkey's principled position with regard to Crimea remains unchanged. Turkey continues to support the territorial integrity of Ukraine, including Crimea. Thank you.
Thank you. We now offer the floor to the Islamic community in Bosnia and Herzegovina, to be followed by the delegation of the United Kingdom.
So thank you. Your Excellencies, ambassadors of OSCE participating states, I'm thankful for given the opportunity to address you on behalf of the Islamic community in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We are coming from traditional Islamic community in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We hope you will join us for our side event on Bosnian experience of administrating Islamic affairs in secular states. We are coming with possible solutions, not problems, but we will tell you too about some challenges that Islamic community is facing, especially about returnees. Then government of Republic Srpska still discriminates against Bosniak returnees, not allowing them to study national group of subjects, especially Bosnian language. Returnees are not given the same opportunity as majority ethical group. And about the Islamic community in Bosnia and Herzegovina is a traditional and independent religious community. In its current form, it has been established after the Austro-Hungarian arrival to Bosnia and Herzegovina. Before that, Bosnian Muslims were associated with the religious and legal system of the Ottoman Empire. But when the Caliphate and the supreme religious authority for Bosnian Muslims was transmitted to the Islamic community in Sarajevo, comprising parts of the Islamic community in Bosnia and Herzegovina are Muslim communities in Sandžak, Serbia, Croatia, and Slovenia, as well as organized communities of Bosniak Muslims in the countries of Western Europe, North America, and Australia. The central place and main role in the determination of common objectives and activities is placed on the Assembly of the Islamic Community and the Reis Ulema, the Grand Mufti, Council of Muftis, and the Riyasat. The tradition of the Islamic community in Bosnia and Herzegovina, its organizational structure, our practice and experience could be of interest to the EU and OSCE countries in organizing their relations with Muslim communities. For example, we strive in Germany for the status of a public corporation, Körperschaft des öffentlichen Rechts. Having all this in mind, I would like to ask you to visit our side event entitled The Role of the Islamic Community in Bosnia and Herzegovina in the Institutionalization of the Islam in the EU and OSCE member states. The event will be held this afternoon at 13 hours at meeting room 3. Thank you.
Thank you for your intervention and also for the invitation to the side event. We now offer the floor to the delegation of the United Kingdom, to be later followed by Crimsos, Crimea SOS. United Kingdom, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We align ourselves with the statement made by the Netherlands on behalf of the European Union and its member states, and would like to make a few national remarks. Firstly, we would like to echo the previous speakers and pay tribute to the work of Astrid Thors and her role as High Commissioner on National Minorities, and to the staff in The Hague who continue to work on this very important issue during this period of uncertainty. Our support for the work of the 3 OSCE autonomous institutions is no secret. They are part of the OSCE's toolkit of conflict prevention and human rights mechanisms, which together contribute to the OSCE's concept of comprehensive security. Mr. Moderator, as we set out last week, freedom of the media is an essential element of a stable and prosperous society. Being able to access information in a mother tongue allows national minorities to engage effectively in society, to participate in the democratic development of their country, and to exercise all their fundamental freedoms. We welcome the decision to revise the guidelines on the use of national minority languages in the media, recognising the developments in that field. We also see a role for national minorities in relation to other aspects of the media. We have seen the benefits to wider society from positive role models from underrepresented groups in high-profile roles, be this in political life, sporting achievements, the arts or business. Journalism is no exception. National minorities have a role to play not only in relation to passively accessing information, but also in providing it to others in both minority and majority languages. Do not underestimate the power of positive role models for the engagement of others in wider civil society. Finally, we have one recommendation, that participating states work together in the spirit of consensus to agree upon a suitably qualified and able successor to Astrid Thors to take forward this important work without further delay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now offer the floor to Crimsos, Crimea SOS, to be later followed by the European Centre for Democracy Development.
Good morning, dear colleagues. I'd like to say a few words about the situation of Tartars in Crimea. We have Crimean Tartars who do not have their own national state, so they are not subject to the right to self-determination. In March of 2014, following military occupation of Crimea, the Russian Federation organized a referendum, as a result of which Crimea was included in the territory of the Russian Federation. The Tatars were certainly not agreeing to that, and the self-determination of Tatars was thereby grossly violated. There started to be disappearances of Tatars, so intimidating them, and the Russian Federation started also to destroy the system of self-government of Tatars. The Mejlis, their parliament, was named a terrorist organization, and on that basis any Tatar can be charged with a crime. And now everyone understands that the situation for them is unacceptable, and the 2 speakers of the Mejlis have been charged with terrorism and violence. Ataman Jigobra, supposedly responsible for sowing disorder, has also been imprisoned for a period of 10 years, a very harsh sentence indeed. And more than 200 Crimean Tartars and activists have been subject to such intimidation. Someone who demonstrated before a public building can be imprisoned for that as well. And there is an active creation of a so-called territorial self-government, but right from the beginning of the occupation, parallel religious structures were put in place, and the occupying forces are taking over the running of religious institutions. 14 Crimean Tatars have been imprisoned simply for exercising their faith. And at the present time, Crimean Tatars are subject to systemic violations of their human rights. There are mass arrests, seizures, confiscations, and there are at least 11 Crimean Tatars who have simply disappeared. And so we appeal for a cessation of these repressions. There are, according to official census, at least 250,000 Crimean Tatars, and the official policy of the Russian Federation vis-à-vis Crimean Tatars is imbued with systemic repression. Thank you.
We now offer the floor to the European Center for Democracy Development, to be later followed by the delegation of Hungary.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to say that the main problem, which is not being talked about here, in the problem of national minorities, is the rejection by states to recognize their existence and provide them the necessary assistance. Until Germany recognizes as a national minority the Roma, the Frisians, and so on, they do not recognize Turks and Slovaks, Syrian Arabs, and the problem is only going to increase until that time when Ukraine protects the rights of the Crimean Tatars, although it has a law on national cultural autonomies, and does not, until it recognizes the national Russian minorities, problem is going to continue until France recognizes that as national minorities. And it can't even give a statistical provision on what ethnic groups there are in France. There will continue to be a monopoly of Islamic organizations linked to Islamic State. The states of these countries have given themselves a great security problem by ignoring this issue. There's also a problem in Greece. They do not recognize their national minorities. In Germany and France, there are very worrying trends, dangerous trends, when there's an increase in crimes and hate crimes, which are... So the level of physical aggression is growing in step with hate speech. For example, in France, the increase in hate crimes has gone up in line with hate speech by about 13%. And this is linked to violent crime. The state has almost lost control of this process. And the very same is happening in Germany. Over recent years, in the HCMN, there's been a good tradition of having a separate meeting on the issue of national minorities. I would propose the following to the meeting of the HCMN. There's a need to talk about the recognition of national minorities in the OSCE area. Recognition and full accession to the Framework Convention on the Protection of Rights of National Minorities. And I'm talking here about all national minorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much also for the very specific recommendation that you have put forward. I would like to ask all participants to not only raise general issues and concerns related to national minorities, but in particular to focus on the specific topic of today's session, which is the rights of minority representatives to receive, impart, and exchange information through their mother tongue through the various media outlets. This being said, I now offer the floor to the delegation of Hungary, to be followed by the Council of Europe.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. In addition to the statement made on behalf of the European Union, with which we fully align ourselves, let me make the following points.
Hungary considers the office and the mandate of the High Commissioner on National Minorities to be of the utmost importance for the concept of comprehensive security of the OSCE area, and especially for the protection and promotion of rights of national minorities. We commend the steps the High Commissioner has taken in furthering the implementation of human dimension commitments concerning minorities, and are aware of the important work High Commissioner was involved in several participating states. During the visit in Hungary earlier this year, we had the opportunity to engage in constructive dialogue, where we expressed our concerns regarding the situation of certain Hungarian communities living in the neighboring countries. For example, the restrictions on the use of bilingual signs, obstructions and bans against the use of their national symbols, or restrictions concerning the freedom of assembly. One of the basic assumptions of our policy is that Hungarian communities would like to preserve their identity and prosper in their homelands. This is why we and the neighboring countries have to strive to achieve positive economic developments in these regions, which will motivate both younger and older generations to stay and work in their homelands. We share the view of national minority interest groups who claim that regional identification creates cohesion and a stable basis for the economic development of the population as a whole. We deem important to tackle the lack of political will and inertia with regard to the protection of national minorities. A comprehensive and strategic approach is needed to promote a greater visibility and effective use of minority languages in public life. Regarding the media, we endorse ensuring sufficient and stable funding in order to guarantee the viability of media in minority languages, and review the impact of privatization and the introduction of digital television broadcasting on minority media. Finally, we wish to underline the importance of the central principles set out in thematic recommendations and guidelines of the High Commissioner, especially in the recommendation on linguistic rights, education, and the effective participation of national minorities in public life. These and various Council of Europe instruments set the minimum standards of European minority protection that can and should be completed by more generous measures, helping the national minorities to preserve their identity. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. We now offer the floor to the Council of Europe, to be later followed by the delegation of the Holy See.
Mr. Moderator, thank you very much. Council of Europe action in the field of minority protection and respect for diversity is based on the principle that the protection of persons belonging to minorities is part of the universal protection of human rights. Due to very limited time, let me focus my intervention to legal instruments of the Council of Europe. The European Convention on Human Rights, which is the centerpiece of the Council of Europe normative acquis, is of relevance for the protection of minorities. I would like to underline especially the relevance of Article 14 of the Convention and Protocol 12. Protocol 12, which contains a general prohibition against all forms of discrimination. Article 14, which prohibits discrimination in the enjoyment of the right guaranteed by the Convention. There are also two other conventions, very important, with direct relevance to the protection of national minorities, the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities and the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages. Well, the Council of Europe Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities has been in force since February 1998. And the Framework Convention is monitored by the Council of Europe's Committee of Ministers, supported by the Advisory Committee on the Framework Convention, a committee of 18 independent experts, which provides detailed analysis on the minority legislation. Well, as far as the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages, it is the only legal binding instruments in the world for the protection and promotion of traditional, regional, and national minority languages. The Charter contains a system of monitoring its implementation by an independent committee of experts. And let me also underline that the OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities continues to make reference to the Charter as the legal framework of reference for the protection and promotion of languages used by national minorities. In this context, the secretariats of the Charter and High Commissioner regularly exchange information, for example, in relation to High Commissioner country visit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam. We now offer the floor to the delegation of the Holy See, to be later followed by the Cultural Association of Pomac-Xanthi.
Mr. Moderator, the Holy See considers the exclusion of the members of national minorities from the enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms to be not only the seedbed of strife and conflict, but undermining the inherent dignity of every human being. The whole of humanity, beyond its many differences, should form a community that is free of discrimination between peoples and strives for reciprocal solidarity. For this reason, the Holy See believes the OSCE works for national minorities, in particular through the Office of the High Commissioner and its staff, to be crucial to the organization, and the High Commissioner's focus on early warning and conflict prevention cannot be emphasized enough. National minorities should throw our attention on their specific rights and duties. The first and obvious right of minorities is the one to exist. It can be ignored in many ways, for example, but its denial through overt or indirect forms of extinction or marginalization. Secondly, national minorities have the right to preserve and develop their own culture, including their language. And in this respect, the education of children through parental transmission of language and cultural identity plays an essential role. Thirdly, the right to religious freedom applies to all communities as well as to individuals. Consequently, national minorities should be free to profess and practice their religion, including the freedom to worship as a community. Finally, they should also be guaranteed a legitimate freedom of exchange and contact with groups having a common heritage, even if they live in the territory of another state. Because every right carries with its corresponding duties, members of minority groups also have duties towards society. In the first place, they have the duty to contribute, like all citizens, to the common good of the state in which they live, and to all citizens of that state. Secondly, a minority group has the duty to promote the freedom and dignity of each one of its members, and to respect the decisions of each one, even if someone were to decide to adopt the majority culture. The Holy See was most pleased with the event IREL this year that celebrated the 20th anniversary of the Hague recommendations regarding the education rights of national minorities, and participated actively in discussions. The celebration affirmed once more the key role education played and continues to play for and among national minorities in the OSCE region, and its notable contributions to conflict prevention work. The Holy See believes in the principle that every human person, irrespective of his or her ethnic, cultural or national origin or religious belief, possesses an inherent dignity. It is out of this dignity that the universal human rights flow, and it is this dignity that we strive to defend, uphold, and value when we defend human rights. The Catholic Church is close to those members of national minorities who are suffering. The Church shares their moments of pain and their reason for legitimate pride. My delegation is confident that through the commitments of the OSCE and the quiet diplomacy of its High Commissioner on National Minorities, the trials of national minorities may soon cease, and that they all may be secure in the enjoyment of their rights. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The full version of the statement will be published later. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now offer the floor to the Cultural Association of Pomac-Xanthi, to be later followed by the National Association of Northern Epirus 1914.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor for me to participate in this conference. I am here with you as a president of the Cultural Union of the Pomaks of Xanthi in order to talk about the history, the language, and the tradition of the Pomaks of Thrace. Now, my translator will continue.
The Pomaks are struggling for the protection of their native language. Unfortunately, today in Thrace, there are discriminations within the Muslim minority. The Muslim minority of Thrace consists of Pomaks, Roma, and Muslims of Turkish origin. We are Greek Pomaks. Let me refer to a very important subject. Nowadays, in the Pomak villages of Thrace, there are only minority schools which have a bilingual program in both Greek and Turkish, not Pomak. The Pomaks of Greece have expressed their preference for public education for their children. We want our children to go to the same schools as the schools of the other children in Greece, but we should also have the chance to study our mother tongue. Ladies and gentlemen, in the last decades, there has been an attempt by Turkish nationalists in Thrace to terrorize us in order to falsely declare ourselves as Turks and not Pomaks. They used all means to isolate us and make us forget our native language. But we do not want the Muslim religion in Greece to be identified with the Turkish language. We believe in tradition, we respect our forefathers and the history of our country. We love Europe. We believe in a peaceful future for all the citizens of Thrace, both Christians and Muslims. Thank you.
Thank you. We now offer the floor to the National Association of Northern Epirus, 1914, to be followed by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Kiev Patriarchate.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Distinguished delegates, the most important issue for the ethnic Greek minority of Albania, which resides in the area historically called Northern Epirus, is the property problem. The courts and other Albanian state actors favor foreigners that appear as former owners, and they take huge areas that normally belong to members of the Greek minority. For example, at the municipality of Finiki, that is almost entirely populated by the Greek minority, the State Service for Property Return gave more than 20,000 acres in foreigners that have absolutely no relation whatsoever with the wider area. It is of particular importance the area of Himara, where I come from, where the Albanian government refuses to recognize to its inhabitants the status and the rights of the ethnic Greek minority. With the pretext of the tourist development of this coastal area, Edi Rama's government is plotting in the last 3 years a velvet ethnic cleansing of the Greeks and our expulsion from our ancestral homes. The first stage of the plan is to characterize the whole area of Himara as tourist, to be taken away from its natural owners, to give them, even with 4 property titles, to government-friendly business people, and in the final stage, to install population from other parts of Albania in order to make the Greek minority disappear from Himara. The highlight of terrorism to all those that want to defend their land or even their own houses from the so-called tourist development was the violent attack that the rightful owners suffered inside the City Council of Himara on June the 30th, 2016 by the henchmen of the so-called investors. We demand the implementation of the Protocol of Corfu that Albania signed in 1914, which offers us autonomy, as well as the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities, so that the ethnic Greek minority of Northern Epirus in Albania will be efficiently protected. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. We now offer the floor to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Kiev Patriarchate, to be later followed by the spiritual direction of the Muslims of the Crimean Republic and the Sevastopol city. Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the floor is yours.
The Ukrainian Orthodox Church Kiev Patriarchate is very concerned by more and more repression exercised by the Russian Federation on national and religious minorities. This pressure takes place on the territory of the Russian Federation and in occupied Crimea. Religious minorities are continuing to be repressed when they are not subject to the Moscow Patriarchate. The communities of the Kiev Patriarchate in Ginsk, in the Moscow Oblast, had a church that was taken away by the authorities. And on the basis of a court decision, when they built a new church that was termed illegal and is to be destroyed. And the Metropolitan Fyodor and Metropolitan Farir are subject to pressure by the FSB, which is interfering in the internal life of these religious communities. And we are very concerned by the adoption of a new package of laws which undermines human rights as a whole, the right to religious education, to religious practice. A whole series of religious leaders in the Russian Federation spoke in public against these laws, but their opinion was ignored. The Kiev Patriarchate believes that our believers in occupied Crimea are of particular concern. Ukrainians in Crimea are now deprived of the possibility of educating their children in Ukraine, of expressing their views freely, of setting up independent civil society organizations, and they're deprived of other basic rights. Our religious communities are either prevented completely from exercising their religion or are intimidated when they do that. So we would call upon the OSCE to pay particular attention to the violations of religious minority rights everywhere in the Russian Federation, but especially in occupied Crimea. Thank you.
We now offer the floor to the spiritual direction of the Muslims of the Crimea Republic and the Sevastopol city, to be later followed by the Russian school in Estonia.
Ismailov Adir Suleimanovich, заместитель муфтия.
I am a deputy of the Mufti in Sevastopol. I came directly from Crimea. So over 2.5 to 3 years, I have been observing all of the processes occurring in Crimea, and especially what the situation of Muslims is. And I hear the opinions of people outside Crimea, but I can tell you that there is a decree of the president to rehabilitate the Crimean Tatars and other groups. The Crimean Tatar language is a national language together with Ukrainian and Russian in the Republic of Crimea, and the Muslims of Crimea have not been able to enjoy that advantage in the past. Educational institutions are functioning. There is a Crimean theater, there are folklore groups, there is a university in the Crimean language, there are national schools, and there also is in the city of Sevastopol more than 200 registered Muslim religious organizations. There are about 70 mosques that function normally. And it should be noted that there is also work being done on the toponymics of various localities that will have their Crimean name as a second name. Now, over the period of control of Crimea by the Ukrainian authorities, no such decisions to promote Crimean language and culture were taken. Now, of course, there are a number of problems to be resolved. More dissemination of the Crimean Tatar language to make that an obligatory language in schools on the territory of Crimea is something that we would like to achieve. And what is enshrined in the Constitution of the Republic of Crimea, which guarantees that, should fully be implemented. At the present time, I can tell you that we are in peaceful coexistence with our neighbors, and we have the legislative basis that we need to guarantee our rights. Together with other communities, we are avoiding an approach of confrontation as was in the past, but we are working rather on the basis of constructive dialogue and good friendly neighborly relations. I'd also like to draw attention to the situation of the media. The Mufti of Crimea, Ablayev, have been termed traitors and collaborators by television channels broadcast from outside Crimea, and that is simply fomenting hostility. There are calls for torturing these mufti. That's in the Turkish language. There's calls for jihad, and that is unacceptable.
Estonia, to be later followed by the delegation of Ukraine.
Good morning, my name's Alisa Dontsova. I am a representative of the Russian school in Estonia. For the third time, the government of Estonia has rejected the rights of the schools of Tallinn to teach Russian. In order to protect the rights of the Russian national minority to teach in Russian, the NGO Russian School of Estonia initiated a legal process, the aim of which was to overturn the decision of the government on preventing teaching in Russian language. At the moment, we've gone through two legal instances in Estonia. 10 days ago, we achieved a cassation from the State Court of Estonia. That's the last instance which we planned to turn to. Now we will turn to the European Court of Human Rights with our complaint. In Estonia, the Russian-speaking community is about 31% of the population. Nevertheless, the Estonian courts and government have a policy of a single nationality country. The Estonian courts based their rejection on teaching Russian language in schools because Estonia is the state language in Estonia. However, we would recall that Russian is a national minority in Estonia, and Russian schools have been in Estonia since the 18th century. These courts refer to the preamble of the Constitution, which says the Estonian Republic was created in order to preserve the Estonian nation, language, and culture forever. This is interpreted to mean that the state has to make all forms of life as Estonian as possible, including education. International standards of the Estonian courts are interpreted to mean that internal legislation implemented in this area is implemented in areas in which it does not contradict. Recommendations of international organizations such as the OSCE, the UN, the Council of Europe are simply ignored. The Estonian court in this case to protect Russian schools did not look at the violation of the Hague recommendations, saying that they are not binding for the implementation, and they are recommendations. This is the relation to other recommendations. In Estonia, they're considered to cynically, and they are not implemented. Every remark of human rights defenders, the Estonian authorities respond to with their own opinion, namely that Estonia as a state is created for the Estonians and it doesn't have no obligations with regard to national minorities. Based on this principle, all talks about the rights of national minorities in Estonia are untimely. We can once again recall the mass statelessness in the European country. We'll soon have to continue with our legal process against the Estonianization of Russian school in the ECHR. We hope that the European Court, unlike the courts in Estonia, will not think that the rights of national minorities are a threat to the state security. We hope that the issue of protection of Russian schools in Estonia will also be supported by the OSCE. Thank you.
The delegation of Ukraine, to be later followed by Think Out. Ukraine, the floor is yours.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, the dissemination of intolerance and hatred in the 21st century is increasing and is fomenting a military conflict which can become highly destructive. Aggressive states are making sure that people are not given their rights in order to disintegrate their societies, applying terror, violence, occupation of territories, and this is being done by states that pretend in the international arena to be peace lovers. And of course, Russia is the most flagrant violator of these rights. That country which occupied Crimea and has been fomenting military activity in the east of Ukraine. Schools with Ukrainian as a language of education have been closed. leaders of Crimean Tartars have been arrested. There has been massive arrest of individuals such as the leader Temchigos of the Crimean Tartars. The Mufti of Crimea, Adalis Maleev, said not a word about the fact that there are many Muslims who are being imprisoned for 5, 10, 50 years simply for the exercise of their religion. All of this is being done to drive Crimean Tartars out of their peninsula. The Ukrainians, people with other citizenship living in Crimea, having rejected the occupation of Crimea by Russia, have seen their human rights grossly violated. In Ukraine, we have more than 1 million internally displaced persons, and I think we can be very frank and open on these issues. Let us not hide our head in the sand. I was deported by Putin to the same extent that my parents and grandparents were deported by Stalin in the 30s and 40s. And no such case of discrimination can be accepted, and combating it cannot be effective when international organizations such as the OSCE do not find effective instruments to prevent the destructive actions of certain member states of those organizations. So we believe it is necessary to propose that within the OSCE there be a separate independent mechanism for resolving the situation in Crimea and for monitoring the human rights situation on that peninsula. Thank you.
This is Think Out, to be later followed by Sandijan. Think Out, the floor is yours.
Thank you, moderator. I'm speaking on behalf of the Belgian NGO Think Out. Think Out is deeply concerned about the situation of the Turkish minority of Western Thrace and Greece. Under the 1923 Laws on Peace Treaty, Turkish minority of Western Thrace has an equal right with the non-Muslim minority in Turkey to establish, manage and control at their own expense and any charitable, religious and social institution, any school and other establishment for instruction and education, with the right to use their own language and to exercise their own religion freely therein. We observe that educational and religious autonomy of the Turkish minority in Western Thrace has been undermined and diminished by governmental practices over years. Our main important finding is that Greece denies existence of any ethnic Turkish minority in the country, and the government continues to place legal restrictions on the names of association of the term Turkish. The government declared in 1983 that there were no Turks in Greece and claimed that the members of Muslim minority are Greek Muslims. Xanthi Turkish Union, Komotini Turkish Youth Union, and Western Thrace Turkish Teachers Union were dissolved in 1986 by local courts, and the Supreme Court decided the dissolution of the associations on the ground that the word Turkish referred to citizens of Turkey and could not be used to describe citizens of Greece. Today, there are 3 cases which have been brought before the European Court of Human Rights. These 3 cases concern the dissolution of or refusal to register the applicant associations by the competent courts on the sole basis of a suspicion that the applicants intended to promote the idea that an ethnic minority existed in Greece. The court held unanimously in 2007 and 2008 that there had been a violation of Article 11, freedom of assembly and association. Council of Europe's Committee of Ministry closely follows the developments about the implementation of court judgments. We urge the Greek government to effectively implement the court decisions immediately. Concerning religious autonomy, the government doesn't still recognize the right of the Turkish minority of Western Thrace to elect its own religious leaders, and rather it appoints muftis on the ground that the muftis have legal authority on civic issues. Concerning educational autonomy, the government has wide-ranging control over the minority schools at all levels, whether it concerns the competition and the functioning of the school boards, the hiring and firing of teachers, the distribution of textbooks, or the building and repair of school buildings. The situation of the Turkish minority in the region is deeply worrying, and we believe that other international NGOs and human rights institutions should pay a fact-finding mission to the region and make observation at first hand. We urge the government of Greece to revise its minority policy in accordance with bilateral and international treaties, as well as other international human rights documents. We hope that the government makes good use of all available domestic and international instruments, including advisory and consultative bodies, in order to address problems in minority issues. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you. I would also like to ask all the speakers to please kindly mind also the interpreters who have to keep pace with the speakers when they present their statements. If you have a statement which is a bit longer, you can always present it through the documents distribution system. Next on the list of speakers is Sandy Zhan, to be later followed by the Ukrainian Helsinki Human Rights Union. Sandy Zhan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Oleg Duhohov, and I represent an organization from South Ossetia. According to the last USSR census in 1989, in Georgia, outside of the South Ossetian Autonomous Republic, there were more than 100,000 Ossetian people. 2 years later, the Georgian president, Zviad Gamasouria, said that Ossetians are rubbish, which need to be swept out of the country by the Georgian broom, and that is a quote. The Georgian government took on a Nazi ideology of the destruction and pressuring of the Ossetian ethnicity out of the country. The Georgia-Ossetian conflict started, and tens of thousands of Ossetian people had to leave the country, the majority of which were outside of the conflict zone. According to 2002, according to the census, there were 38,000 Ossetians, and this figure was subject to modest optimism. There was a hope that Georgia had changed and that it had recognized its mistakes and that Georgia had a future for the Ossetian minority. However, the census in Georgia in 2014 was a cold shower. The number of Ossetian people in Georgia was 14,000 people. So over 10 years, under the democratic presidency of Saakashvili, Ossetians in Georgia had been reduced by threefold the number of what was one of the biggest ethnicity of Georgia, whose history in this country could be counted in the century, had become a statistical error. It became clear that Ossetians in Georgia had no future. Ossetians in Georgia were totally cleansed, and it was clear that the next census of Ossetians in Georgia, would show that there were none at all. Before I talk about the reasons why, I would like to talk about the historical choice of the people of South Ossetia, who at the beginning of the 90s chose to be independent from Georgia, led by the instinct for self-preservation. For our people, an independent South Ossetia became a way in which it could preserve itself. And in such a situation, the voice of those who call for dialogue with Georgia to find a way for coexistence could raise a better laugh. Thank you very much, Chairman. I will give the rest of my text to the Secretariat.
Next on the speakers list is the Ukrainian Helsinki Human Rights Union, to be later followed by the Analytical Center for Interethnic Cooperation and Consultation. The Ukrainian Helsinki Human Rights Union, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. My statement is related not only to problem of ethnic minorities and human rights defenders protecting minority communities, but also the urgent issue of safety of human rights defenders who have been pressured while being here at HDIM. And this statement is made not only on behalf of my organization, but also on behalf of Civic Solidarity Platform, the biggest union of human rights organizations in the OSCE area. On 20th of September, chair of the board of NGO Bir Duino, Talikan Ismailova, spoke at this session here in this hall. She highlighted the human rights situation in Kyrgyz Republic, referring to the narrowing political space and focused on rights of women, children, and migrants. During her speech, another human rights activist, Aziza Abdurasulova, helped her to show pictures of women from Kyrgyzstan who were burned alive in a recent print shop fire in Moscow. During Ms. Ismailova's speech, another HDIM participant, Mr. Batyrov, was sitting next to her. Mr. Batyrov is an ethnic Uzbek from Kyrgyzstan who currently has refugee status in Sweden. He is registered as meeting participant. Following these threats against Ms. Ismailova and Ms. Abdurasulova began surfacing in Kyrgyzstan, simply because Ms. Ismailova had been sitting next to Mr. Batyrov. According to media reports, the press service of Interior Ministry of Kyrgyzstan has confirmed that this department has already begun work aimed at bringing to justice those citizens of Kyrgyzstan who were sitting next to Mr. Batyrov when he was speaking at the OSCE and did not react correctly, in brackets, to his statements. There is also a smearing campaign against Ms. Abdirsulova and Ms. Ismailova on Kyrgyz social media, and they are being threatened to be met in the airport and brought to their senses when they are back to Kyrgyzstan. We categorically protect all threats against human rights defenders and demand that their rights be respected and safety protected. We call on the official delegation of Kyrgyz Republic to make a statement assuring that safety of Ms. Ismailova and Ms. Abdirasulova is ensured. We also encourage the delegations of other OSCE participating states to speak up on the threats directed against these brave women and human rights defenders. We urge the leadership of the OSCE Office of Democratic Institutions and Human Rights and German OSCE presidency to take adequate measures to ensure their safety and safety of all human rights defenders at the Human Dimension implementation meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now offer the floor to the Analytical Center for Interethnic Cooperation and Consultation, to be later followed by the Regional Bulgarian National Cultural Autonomy of the Republic of Crimea, named after the Paish Hilendarsky. The Analytical Center, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Moderator. Good afternoon. I represent the Analytical Center for Interethnic Cooperation and Consultation. Fight against the discrimination is one of the most important challenges to Georgia. The adoption of the law on the elimination of the forms of discrimination is a step for the country, but implementation of this law is a challenge. The 57% of the cases of discrimination before the public defender of Georgia deals with the public sector. Then the 43% deals with the private sector. 15% of the appeals are about the discrimination in a labor relation on the ground of political or other opinions. Sexual orientation and gender identity is offended in 11% of the cases, as well as discrimination on the ground of religion. Disability, gender, ethnic origin, each is claimed by the 10% of appeal. Last year did not show any improvement in full enjoyment of the freedom of religion. The main problem in the field of freedom of religion remains investigation of hate crimes and legal qualification of the offense. In some cases, quick response to the hate offense is problematic. Individuals who participated in the acts violating the rights of Muslims in 2012-2014 were not prosecuted until now. This year, Georgia witnessed dozens of the cases of the verbal and physical abuse of the Yahweh's witnesses. The facts of damage and the destruction of the religious building and religious literature also took place. Human rights group and public defender said that the authorities failed to respond properly to violence incidents of the religion grounds. In a recent periodic report on Georgia, European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance said the authorities have not taken adequate measure to deal with religion intolerance, and also failed to enforce the law to protect the rights of religion minorities. There are also problems with political participation of ethnic minorities, as they do not have access to the social life, do not master state language to the full extent, and are rarely accepted on the first position in the party list. Another problem is absence of the quality information product in the minority language. All this prevents ethnic and religious minorities in Georgia from full civil integration. We recommend to the government of Georgia to ensure full compliance to the obligation taken by the country within OSCE Human Dimension framework. We recommend to OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities to continue its monitoring to outreach work in the country. Thanks.
Thank you. Next on the speakers list is the Regional Bulgarian National Cultural Autonomy of the Republic of Crimea, to be later followed by the Latvian Human Rights Committee. The Regional Bulgarian Autonomy, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, I represent the Regional Bulgarian National Autonomy of the Republic of Crimea. I've been working as a social activist for more than 10 years, representing the diaspora, and I come to Warsaw today in order once again to report to you on the situation in Crimea and to hear your views about that. Now, I can see today that some delegations are speaking very negatively about our situation, that Crimea is an occupied territory, that it's a place where national minorities are repressed. But I'm here to give witness that that is absolutely not the case. The referendum that took place in 2014 was an expression by citizens living on the territory of the Republic of Crimea to exercise their self-determination. And I know that a number of political forces in Crimea supported the holding of the referendum, and after seeing what happened in May of 2014 in Odessa, when many participants in this process suffered, and we've seen what is happening in Donbass in the east of Ukraine, where regular army units are taking part in military activity against their own citizens. So we made the right choice. But given that supply of drinking water and electricity has been blocked, similarly with provision of food, that's blocked by the Ukrainians, and that is something that Crimeans are perceiving as discrimination against them. And we have become convinced once again that thanks to the inclusion of Crimea in the Russian Federation, there will be peace and stability. Now, as an ethnic Bulgarian, I can understand why Crimean Tatars who don't live on the territory of Crimea are engaged in such an aggressive propaganda, because they haven't been in Crimea for 2 years and they don't know the real situation. The real situation is that a new constitution has been adopted with the enshrinement of 3 languages, Russian, Ukrainian, and Crimean Tatar, as official languages. There is a decree by the President of the Russian Federation to rehabilitate Crimean Tatars formerly deported from Crimea. Now, I can see that my time is running out, so in closing, I would just like to say that I hope that the OSCE will carry out an objective analysis of the situation in Crimea, and I think it would be very appropriate to have OSCE representatives visiting Crimea more frequently so that they can garner objective information about how the situation is unfolding there and about the fact that Crimeans are very happy with the security and stability that they are currently enjoying.
Committee, to be later followed by the National Forum Ossetia Accuses. Latvian Human Rights Committee, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm Alexander Kuzmin from Latvian Human Rights Committee. First, regarding the special topic of today's session, media. The law on electronic mass media in Latvia has been recently amended, and strict restrictions for radio stations willing to broadcast in minority languages will be somewhat softened and postponed for the next year. But still, next year, most of radio stations will have to broadcast all of their content in the official language, Latvian language. Regarding one of the main topics of the whole HDIM now, rights of children, the continuing dissolution of minority schools, mostly Russian minority bilingual schools, is continuing now in Latvia, and the Russian language bilingual schools get closed faster and more often than the average, although they are already fewer than the share of Russian-speaking population. And this policy is going against the recommendations of OSCE High Commissioner on the National Minorities. Also, another topic where there are recommendations of the many OSCE bodies, including the High Commissioner on National Minorities, whom we are thankful for these recommendations, both the previous Commissioner Vollebeck and current Commissioner, outgoing Commissioner Tors, is the issue of voting rights. Still, more than 200,000 adult people remain stateless in Latvia without any rights to vote, including in local elections, which will happen in 2017. Besides, NGOs of minorities are possibly under risk because of a current pending bill in the Latvian parliament, which makes suspect receiving foreign funding. Next to last, refugees are in a more vulnerable position than last year because in the end of the last year, refugees' basic benefits were cut more than 40%. Now many people who settled to Latvia by EU scheme have left Latvia already. And as a last point, I want to welcome the fact that the Republic of Lithuania has recognized this mistake and cancelled several prohibitions to enter Lithuania for minority rights activists from Latvia, which were imposed last year and spoken about in the previous HDIM. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the speakers list is the National Forum Ossetia Accuses, to be later followed by the Center for Research and Protection of Fundamental Rights. National Forum Ossetia Accuses, the floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Moderator, today I'd like to talk about the education of the Georgian minority in South Ossetia and the Ossetian minority in Georgia. In the Republic at the moment, there are 53 schools in operation, 7 of those are Georgian. That's not taking into account schools where teaching is partially in Georgian, which is around about 14% of all educational institutions. This is about 10% inhabitants of Georgian nationality. That is, the number of schools for people in South Ossetia of Georgian nationality is in a more privileged position than citizens of Ossetian nationality. Children use textbooks which are printed in Georgia. Those in Georgian schools are more privileged because they have a payment from in Georgia from the budget of South Ossetia. Out of 160,000 Ossetians in 1989, there were 97 Ossetian schools, of which 7 were outside of South Ossetia. That is for 100,000 Ossetians living outside of South Ossetia and Georgia, majority of whom lived in quite a small area, about 7 Ossetian schools. But even then, the situation with Ossetian schools could have been better. Now in Georgia, there isn't a single Ossetian school. All Ossetian schools in Georgia have been closed. That's a sad reality, as you can see. A comparison with the rights of minorities and education does not reflect favourably on the Georgian side. I would like to also talk on the actions of Georgia, of the International Instruments for Protection of the Rights of Minorities. In 2005, the Georgian Parliament ratified this Framework Convention on the Protection of National Minorities, having made a number of reservations on its implementation. In particular, underlined that guaranteeing full entry into force of the convention was not possible until territorial integrity of Georgia was restored. With regard to the support and development of languages of national minorities, the Parliament noted that the state has to provide national minorities with the opportunity to study the state language, but it did not recognise the obligations of the state to support the languages of minorities and facilitate their development. When the Council of Europe adopted in 1999 Georgia took upon itself the obligation to sign and ratify the European Charter of Regional Languages a year after its entry into force. However, it is not signed and not ratified. This is one of the reasons which is forming a hindrance to Ossetian and Georgian dialogue. Thank you very much.
The speakers list is the Center for Research and Protection of Fundamental Rights, to be followed by the delegation of Serbia.
Thank you for allowing me to take the floor. I am from the Center for Research and Protection of Fundamental Rights. Now, of course, it's extremely important that minorities be protected, that there not be intolerance. Now, in a recent report of the State Department, we have seen a list of mass media in Lithuania. There is an accusal of violation of the rights of minorities, but we'd like to thank Lithuanians that this year representatives of Russian groups have managed to be engaged in dialogue with the Ministry of Education and to preserve 2 kindergartens with Russian language. But Russian language schools are being threatened, being charged with engaging in a post-Soviet form of education but education in Slavic languages has existed in Lithuania since the 16th century. This is not the result of the Soviet period. Now, the publication of such reports in the media is destabilizing for the society, and it intimidates minority groups, and it means that the rights of these groups are set aside. A new version of the education law was recently enacted, completely ignoring a petition by Russian and Polish speakers who signed the petition in the number of 60,000. And there is a single state examination at present, but the percentage of people who don't pass has gone down 13.3% from 15% last year, and yet that was an argument for not providing education in the other languages. But it was also stated that new textbooks in the Lithuanian language will not be prepared. But when there is a single exam on the state language for all, that surely is discrimination, especially when the actual education required to learn that language for those for whom it is not a mother tongue are not available. And there is even in this report reference to Mickiewicz and Milos as Lithuanian authors. But my full report will be available on the site.
Yeah, to be later followed by ICLA, the International Civil Liberties Alliance. Serbia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. For many years, Serbia has been supporting and cooperating with all OSCE institutions, including the Office of High Commissioner on National Minorities. We believe that all OSCE executive structures, and in particular institutions, should give their utmost and fully utilize their own capacities and mandates, thus contributing to fostering peace and stability in the OSCE region. HCNM represents one of the most sophisticated mechanisms for the OSCE toolbox for enhancing and consolidating security within the OSCE region, especially with respect to its early warnings actions. Recommendations and guidelines issued in recent years by the Office of High Commissioner on National Minorities could be considered as a valuable tool for the implementation of existing norms and standards, as well as real added value of the OSCE. The Republic of Serbia has benefited from engagement of former High Commissioner of National Minorities, especially in the context of inter-ethnic relations in South Serbia, and in particular in regard to the department of the Subotica Faculty of Economics in Bujanovac. Let me use this opportunity to reiterate our thanks to the former High Commissioner, Commissioners Mr. Volebek and Madame Tors for their committed engagement in this field. Today, we have been implementing high international standards in protecting of individual and collective rights of 20 national minority communities throughout Serbia. Being aware that continuous engagement is needed to promote and safeguard the rights of national minorities, our authorities have been undertaken a number of measures. However, we don't consider our work done. We are constantly making steps in advancing our institutional and legal framework for protection of rights of national minorities, as well as its implementation. In the framework of European integration, Serbia continues to make positive developments. In line with obligations stipulated in the Action Plan for Chapter 23, Justice and Fundamental Rights, and Action Plan for the Realization of the Rights of National Minorities, numerous activities we have been carried out. Most recently, the government has adopted the Action Plan for exercising the rights of national minorities based on a number of international instruments and recommendations. In the field of education, some progress has already been achieved as well. Mr. Moderator, the right of minorities to freely use their own language and script is of great importance as precondition for enjoyment of other rights. In that regard, we believe that all of us sitting around this table should be ready to implement all of our OSCE commitments in a good faith. As we already pointed out, we welcome that in the framework of her regional tour, the former HCNM Madame Tors has visited Croatia recently. This is particularly important taking into account problems regarding national minorities, including Serbian, their language and script rights. We hope that Office of High Commissioner of National Minorities will continue to engage closely with the Croatian institutions and representatives of national minorities to foster social cohesion and inclusive policies. In the Declaration on Advancing Relations and Resolving Outstanding Issues between the two countries, which has been signed by Serbian Prime Minister Aleksandar Vučić and the President of Croatia, Madame Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović, in June this year, the improvement of bilateral protection of national minorities was set as one of the priorities for both sides. It is obvious that the promotion of national minority rights is beneficial for stability and prosperity of the whole region. As it was stated on numerous occasions by the Prime Minister Vučić, Serbia is dedicated to enhancing...
Sir, I'm really sorry, but I would have to ask you to please conclude.
Okay, I'm finishing.
Thank you.
To enhance good neighborly relations and strengthen regional cooperation. With regard to Kosovo and Metohija, our primary concern remains the improvement of the overall situation on the ground of alleviation of the increasing difficult conditions which non-Albanian communities and other vulnerable groups in Kosovo and Metohija face daily. As far as proposal of the representative of Pristina to be present here is concerned, our position has already been expressed many times, including last week at the HDIM. It remains unchanged. It is well known, and we cannot agree with such proposal. The full version of statement will be distributed later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the speakers list is ICLA, the International Civil Liberties Alliance, to be later followed by Set My People Free. ICLA, the floor is yours. Is the ICLA representative in the room? If not, we'll have to move to the next speaker on the list. Then we'll offer the floor to Set My People Free.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Kamal Fahmi, Set My People Free. Tolerance is the ability or willingness to tolerate the existence of opinions or behaviors that one dislike or disagree with. This is from the Mag Dictionary. And is guided by the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. True tolerance is limited by the rule of the law, which is based on freedom, justice, and equality. Tolerance does not justify violence. Tolerance does not justify people taking the law into their own hands. Tolerance should not tolerate ideologies which criminalize freedom of speech and thought, such as apostasy and blasphemy laws in Islam. Like the murder of Charlie Hebdo journalist last year, this is very sad. Or Nahid Hatter, who was murdered yesterday in Jordan as he came out of court. OSCE should not tolerate such incidents in the OSCE. These laws are shocking freedom worldwide. We cannot tolerate FGM. We cannot tolerate child marriage. We cannot tolerate women oppression. Tolerance without critical thinking and analytic thinking is censorship and leads to suppression. We cannot tolerate tolerance without truth and common sense lead to relativism and the end to the rule of law. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next on the speakers list is the Association of Turkish Culture, Art and Interaction, to be later followed by the Ecumenical Federation of Constantinopolitans.
Thank you, Moderator. Excellency, distinguished guests, on behalf of Association for Turkish Culture, Art and Interaction, I will touch briefly on the most urgent issues on the rights and circumstances of the Turkish minority in Bulgaria. To find out what it's all about, it's good to know that we are with Turkish root, part of the Bulgarian society and part of the European culture.
We believe that education is the most important thing in the world. Unfortunately, almost 1 million Turks don't have education in mother tongue. The state has a huge obligation to provide this education, but it runs away from that as the devil runs away from incense. Subject mother tongue is no longer protected by the law. After the change in the law on preschool and school education, which is effective from August this year, subject mother tongue is not among compulsory optional subjects as until now. Already taught only as an optional subject, and it's placed among the subject as choreography and religion. Here on the mother tongue is not viewed as a fundamental human right and cognition, but rather is reduced to the level of choreography, which in turn is just a vocational training. This subject is not valued, and there is no grade. It is studied outside the school program. This is a mockery because every malicious education minister can say stop learning the mother tongue. There is no law to stop him or her. Some other specific cases for intolerance and discrimination. Pork meat in the kindergarten and hospitals. And of course, prohibiting sermons language other than Bulgarian. I am read it letter by letter. Prohibiting foreign entities to conduct ceremonies in Bulgarian, a ban on sermons language other than Bulgarian, a ban on donation and funding of religious organizations by foreign entities, foundations, and companies, and required each temple to be raised Bulgarian flag. These are the main ideas in amendments to the law on religion written by the deputies of Patriotic Front. The Patriotic Front support the government in Bulgaria. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I would like to ask all the forthcoming speakers to please adhere to the time limits, because we already have at least 10 registered right of replies after the speakers' presentations. We now offer the floor to the Ecumenical Federation of Constantinopolitans, to be later followed by the Legal Information Center for Human Rights.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The case of autochthonous Greek Orthodox community of Istanbul, together with the communities of the two Aegean islands of Koçeada Imbros and Boçeada Tenedos belonging to Turkey, is a typical case of ethnic as well as religious minority which was subjected to severe violations in its human and minority rights throughout the whole of the 20th century. As a consequence of these violations, the community has decreased from 125,000 members to almost 2,000, which is about 2% of the population that would have existed if their rights were respected by the State of the Republic of Turkey. The legal status of these minority communities was established and placed under the protection of the International Treaty of Lausanne of 1923. Even though the treaty enabled the foundation of the Republic of Turkey, nevertheless the minority has experienced extensive violations of their human and religious rights during the period 1923-2003. The most severe violations towards the ethnic minority were the mobilization to work battalions of minority men in 1941, the welfare tax of 1942-44, aiming the economic destruction of the minorities, the massive scale pogrom of September 1955 in Istanbul, the forced deportation of members of Greek community of Istanbul in 1964. Furthermore, the anti-minority state measures were strengthened after the coup d'etat of 1960 by the establishment of special minority commissions with suspending powers of all executive, legislative and judicial authorities, of whose members were primarily selected from the state security services until 2004. All the above violations happened despite the fact that the Republic of Turkey signed the European Convention of Human Rights as early as 1954. Even though, after the year 2004, the discriminatory measures had been alleviated considerably, there are still pending problems such as the return of minority welfare foundations' real estate properties. A serious problem that has aroused the last 4 years is the suspension of the elections at the minority welfare foundations. It is very clear that if this community is to survive, a generous program of repatriation will be needed, especially amongst the younger members of the expatriate Greek Orthodox community. Moreover, in order to achieve this, the EFT during the last 5 years has submitted to the government of Turkey specific proposals to make possible the repatriation and hence contribute to the revitalization of the community. Moreover, in order to achieve this, hate publications which occurred in the past in extensive scale should be avoided. A more recent example of serious hate publication is aimed on ecumenical patriarchate as an institution.
I'm really sorry, but I'll have to ask you to kindly conclude your remarks.
One sentence. The allegation in this article is about the supposed involvement of Patrick Bartholomew in the attempt of seizure of power in Turkey in July 2016. It is a totally condemnable fact. We have the conviction that the Turkish government will refute the above application and will take the appropriate measures of ecumenical patriarchate to continue uninterrupted its mission towards mutual tolerance and peaceful coexistence in a world divided from suffering due to conflicts of all nature. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And you may always submit your statement in a written form to the documents distribution system. I was also informed that as of now we have already 11 registered delegations who would like to exercise their right of reply. Therefore, we will have to allocate 1 minute to each delegation who wishes to take the floor to exercise the right of reply. Therefore, we kindly ask all delegates to limit their planned intervention to 1 minute. Now I offer the floor to the Legal Information Center for Human Rights, to be later followed by the delegation of Georgia.
Thank you, moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Larisa Semyonova from the Legal Information Center for Human Rights of Estonia, and in my intervention today and tomorrow, I will base myself on the results of the 6th monitoring review of integration in Estonian society, and also on our data from our organization which we've received over the recent years. Firstly, I'd like to draw your attention to the situation of statelessness, because this situation pertains to those people who do not have the statehood of the country in which they live, and they do not have rights, including political rights and freedom of expression of their own opinion and freedom of expression, and also the right of movement. Recently, the Estonian authorities have undertaken a number of legislative steps towards minorities living in the state. These include measures to reduce the number of stateless persons. Older people, for example, over 65 years of age, will no longer have to do the written part of the citizenship exam. They would only have to do the verbal part. And stateless child born in Estonia to stateless parents will automatically acquire citizenship. And according to this monitoring, this is good, but unfortunately, according to the 6% of the country's population is stateless. Well, 192 people received Estonian citizenship through naturalization in 2015, but 332 people received citizenship, majority because of being Russian. Every 5th non-Estonian who is born in Estonia or whose had parents born in the country still has no Estonian citizenship. Amongst Russian-speaking youth up to 24 years, the figure for stateless people stands at 23%. But amongst the older generation, 65 and older, the figure stands at almost 64%. According to monitoring, 65% of the stateless people in Estonia wish achieve statehood, but nationality, but they find this difficult. The problem of statelessness is not only linked to being traveling inside the country, but also outside of it. The full text of our intervention has been provided to the Secretariat of this event, and it will be circulated. It has recommendations in it, both for the Estonian authorities and also for international organizations. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Now we'll offer the floor to the delegation of Georgia, to be later followed by the Estonian Institute for Human Rights. Georgia, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, Georgia is a multi-ethnic and multicultural country whose stress is in its respect for human rights and promotion and further development of diversity and tolerance. One of the top priorities of the country is the protection of the rights of ethnic minorities residing in Georgia, ensuring their civic integration and preservation of their identity and culture. Our approach is more integration, more diversity, which serves as a prerequisite for stability and democratic development. Approximately 13.2% of the total population, apart from Abkhazia and Tskhinvali region, South Ossetia, belongs to ethnic minorities. And the government of Georgia devotes special attention to the protection of identity and civic integration of the population, which resides in the entire territory of Georgia, also in its parts of Abkhazia and Tskhinvali region, South Ossetia, in a sense that these regions are occupied by the Russian Federation, and there is a real threat for ethnic groups represented there to lose their identity. In recent years, Georgia has achieved significant progress with regard to the protection of rights of ethnic minorities through creating legal guarantees and defining further mechanisms for the implementation of legal norms. In 2015, one of the main instruments, a new civic equality and integration state strategy and respective action plan for 2015 and 20 was adopted, and this strategy is under implementation. In this regard, let me use this opportunity and to express gratitude and thanks to the Office of the OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities and personally to Mrs. Astrid Thors for their valuable support to Georgia in particular for engagement and distinguished input in the process of elaboration of the above-mentioned document. Ethnic minorities in Georgia have access to all stages of education, also in their native languages. Just for information, there are 213 non-Georgian public schools and 7 non-Georgian sectors functioning in Georgia. Georgia also pays attention to the preservation of languages exercised by small ethnic groups that require promotion and support. At this stage, the standards of language instruction, in particular for Ossetian, Chechen, Kurdish, Avar, Udi, and Assyrian languages are approved, and these languages are introduced in various public schools upon request. Here I would like to draw your attention to the human rights situation in the occupied territories of Abkhazia and Tskhinvali region, South Ossetia, which is extremely concerning. Especially the most vulnerable are ethnic Georgians whose rights are severely violated. In particular, the process of education in native Georgian language for ethnic Georgians in the remaining 11 schools of Gali district since 2015 and 16 academic year has been suspended and substituted by Russian language respectively. Georgian textbooks are forbidden in those schools, and academic process runs by using textbooks prepared for Russian schools. And please keep in mind that over 90% of teachers and personnel and 97% of pupils are ethnic Georgians, and most of them even have no command of Russian language.
Madam, I'm really sorry, but I have to ask you to conclude your remarks soon.
Maybe I will take some minutes, and then the full information will be distributed to the audience.
I'm really sorry, but we don't have time for this.
Okay, the
you
full
can always
version
submit your statement through the
of this
distribution
presentation
system.
and information will be distributed to you. Just in the end, I would like to underline that we express our readiness to cooperate with all interested actors, and we highly appreciate engagement of OSCE High Commissioner's Office and international community in the process of providing civic integration and protection of rights in Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we continue with the speakers list, I was informed that the German chairmanship of the OSCE would like to raise a point of order at this moment.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of the German chairmanship, I would like to raise a point of order in connection with the demand of one delegation to remove a speaker from the speakers list. And I would like to give the word to the director of the ODIHR.
Thank you very much, Sabine. On behalf of the ODIHR, I wanted to clarify very clearly that in light of increasing demands, sometimes coming from delegations, and that is exactly the case what we see also in this session, we are faced with a situation that some delegations would like us not to pass the floor to one representative of civil society from their respective country. Let me say very clearly that we cannot do that, and that we will not do that. This would be in clear violation of our mandate. What we are doing here as ODIHR follows a very clear mandate. The mandate has been given us by the 57 states, and in full respect of this, of course, we at ODIHR, we would clearly overstep our mandate if we would not give the floor to individual representatives of the civil society. Let me quote, therefore, please, only one paragraph from Chapter 4 of the Helsinki Document 1992. Quote, the participating states will provide opportunities for the increased involvement of non-governmental organizations in CSCE activities. And later it continues in paragraph 15, make open, they will, accordingly, the participating states will make open to NGOs all plenary meetings of review conferences, ODIHR seminars, workshops and meetings, and human rights implementation meetings, as well as other expert meetings, etc. End of quote. Let me underline very clearly here on behalf of the ODIHR that we remain ready for consultations on existing modalities for any delegation that so wishes. We are so, whether here during the HDIM or during the report on HDIM to the PC, which I will give at October 13. But let me also very clearly say that any possible change to the existing modalities, the exclusive right of the participating states alone, and of course acting by consensus. Let me also add that on behalf of the ODIHR, we would highly, of course, warn against any attempt to change and to undermine the unique character of the HDIM as a place for open and frank discussions between representatives of civil society and governments. This is something which is a really unique point that makes HDIM unique and strong, and we should not undermine that. At least that is the hope also of the team at ODIHR, by limiting the right to speak and to take the floor here. And my last point, of course, in light of reports we have seen, for example, from the BBC this morning, of participants of HDIM returning to their home state, to their home country, being inquired, being asked about what they said and did at HDIM, let me also clearly issue the hope that this will remain a place of frank and free discussion, and nobody should be harassed or be followed for what she or she is saying in a frank and free discussion here. Thank you very much for your attention.
And just to add that the German chairmanship fully supports this approach. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much for this point of order. We now resume the list of registered speakers. We offer the floor to the Estonian Institute for Human Rights, to be later followed by ISAG, the Institute of Advanced Studies in Geopolitics and Auxiliary Sciences. The Estonian Institute for Human Rights, the floor is yours.
Mr. Moderator, Estonian Institute of Human Rights draws our attention to 2 points concerning national minorities and their specific rights that seem to need clarification at our forum. First, according to common understanding, as there is no rigid definition, not every migrant is entitled to constituting or belonging to national minority. Chinese, Vietnamese, Russian and Arab communities residing in our European cities, though of considerable size, don't conform to the legal standards of a national minority and thus are not entitled to enjoy the corresponding rights. And this applies universally in the OSCE area, from Berlin and Baltic cities to Paris and Dublin. The second point concerns segregation, which some participants of our meeting have raised to the status of a specific human right, As a matter of fact, quite to the contrary, segregation itself violates a number of human rights, including equal opportunities, participation in civil and political life, cultural and economic rights, etc. This concerns especially demands on segregation in education that Russia and several organizations financed by Russia promote. Therefore, Estonian Institute of Human Rights declares clear and loud, segregation is not a human right. To the contrary, it leads to violation of human rights. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. We now offer the floor to ISAG, the Institute of Advanced Studies in Geopolitics and Auxiliary Sciences, to be later followed by the International Cultural Center of the Republic of Uzbekistan. The ISAG, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Уважаемые дамы и господа, выступаю.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm speaking here as an expert in analysis for Central Asia. I work in the Institute for International Relations of Vita. Over recent years, I've personally had the opportunity to visit Central Asia more than once, and I would like to make my contribution to this meeting, particularly with regard to the Republic of Kazakhstan, the situation. Now, recall that Central Asia has already been a center of attention of the European Union, which has devoted a specific strategy to Central Asia of the European Union. These states only obtained their independence a few years ago, and all states must, on the one hand, develop their own national identity, and on the other hand, they must also seek to govern an international and interreligious community. I'd like to recall that the Republic of Kazakhstan is one of the few states which rejected ethnic nationalism and which is seeking to provide the right to development of each community, including language rights, linguistic rights. But at the same time, it also seeks to develop a sense of belonging amongst all citizens of the Republic, a feeling of citizenship and not ethnic affiliation. I can say that, for example, the fight with extremism and various religions is somewhere where work is ongoing quite well. I recently had an interview with a representative of the Christian minority, which confirmed to me that despite the various problems, the Christian community in Kazakhstan feel a sense of respect compared to other countries where the majority are Muslim. I would also like to say that for Western institutions, it's very important to study this country, particularly with the understanding that self-respect for national minorities is only possible if there is a national unifying culture which allows all minorities to communicate with one another.
To intervene here,
Okay.
we have 14 delegations who have registered their right of reply, and therefore I'd like to ask all the 5 remaining speakers, before we offer the delegations their right of reply, to please adhere strictly to the allocated 2.5 minutes per participant. This being said, we now offer the floor to the International Cultural Center of the Republic of Uzbekistan.
Dear friends, please allow me to welcome you in the name of the International Cultural Center of the Republic of Uzbekistan, which now coordinates the activities of some 140 cultural centers that are active right across the territory. We're a multinational, a multi-ethnic country where there is a good sense of mutual understanding among 130 ethnic groups. According to our statistics committee, as of 1 January of this year, we had more than 30 million residents, 13 million residents, 6 million of them Uzbeks, and more than 5 being non-Uzbeks. We were one of the first to ratify the UN Convention on Eliminating All Forms of Racism. All told, we have ratified more than 80 international agreements on human rights, and we fully welcome monitoring by the High Commissioner for National Minorities of the OSCE. General education is available in 7 languages, including Kyrgyz, Turkmen, Uzbek, and 4 others. And all of that is funded by the government. In cultural centers, we have teaching in other languages as well. It is possible not just for children, but also for adults to follow language courses and culture courses in order to remain in touch with their sources. We have Armenian, Greek, Lithuanian, Polish, Kyrgyz, and various others, and various other cultural centers. Poles in Tashkent have had a Polish school since 1992, with teachers coming even from Poland to run these courses. Now, the national cultural centers have been received medals from the national government for their very significant social activity, including the Medal Hero of Uzbekistan. Thanks to our President Karimov, respect for other persons, freedom and security, absolute equality for all citizens are the main principles and the fundamental principles that we have set for ourselves. Let me just this book that we've published. It's called Uzbekistan, Our Common House. It's available in Russian, Uzbek, and in English, and we'd like to leave that with the Secretariat.
Register as a civil society organization, you should not be seated behind the delegates' dashboard, but rather in front of the room where all the civil society organizations are taking the floor. We now offer the floor to the Union of Ukrainians in Poland, to be later followed by the HISCA Turkish-American Council. The Union of Ukrainians in Poland, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Olga Kożuszko-Pawełas, and I represent the Union of Ukrainians in Poland. The Ukrainians in Poland is at the moment the largest and also one of the oldest minorities in Poland. We have a long history together, and of course we have also some difficult ones related to history. So from times to time there are some attacks towards the Ukrainian minority. But I must say at this moment, and that because the time is limited, that for 3 years, for last 3 years, we are facing some increase of attacks on Ukrainian minority in Poland, and also on Ukrainian migrants that are very numerous in Poland nowadays. We have been asking why it's happening. Yes, because we in Poland has the best one of the best legislation on minority rights. Poland is also the, as we all know, the supporter of Ukraine. Of Ukraine independence and in Maidan, etc. So we were asking why it's happening. So we noticed that this kind of increase of attacks on the Ukrainian minorities happened after the invasion of Russians in Crimea. Also, we noticed that attacks cannot be explained by a single individuals' actions. The actions are quite organized, planned, and well prepared. what we see it's that these actions are, as examples of such actions, I can mention the devastation on resistant fighters' cemeteries in Poland and memorials. Also, there's the hate speech in internet by far-right organization in Poland that are chauvinist and etc. So we can say that we see this increase, and it's related to some third-party propaganda. As we read in European institutions report, this propaganda comes from Russian, which aims to destabilize the situation also in Poland, and basing on some hate increasing the hate between Poland, the Polish nation, and Ukrainians, which is not the case. So we see.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, but I have to intervene
I
here.
will conclude. We do not criticize Polish government, but we see that this problem should not be left only for local policemen to solve such attacks, but to put it on higher level institutions, and also such institutions like OSCE should also have a field to monitor and to react on such actions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We now offer the floor to AHISKA, Turkish American Council, to be later followed by the human rights movement Birduino, Kyrgyzstan.
Mr. Moderator, dear colleagues, since the main subject of the agenda of this meeting is fulfillment by participating states of the OSCE recommendations in the humanitarian dimension, we would like to refer to two main commitments that have not been fulfilled by participating states regarding the vulnerable group of Meskhetian Turks, or AHISKA Turks. In June of this year, the press service of the Council of Europe distributed information to the effect that the authorities of the Russian Federation did not fulfill a single one of the priority recommendations of the Commission to combat racism and intolerance that was set out in its most recent report on Russia of 2013. This concerned receiving citizenship and having the right of residence in order to ensure access to rights. In 2015, a group of specialists from the Moscow-Helsinki group and from the analytic SOVA Center carried out a study about the AHISKA Turks living in a southern federal okrug of the Russian Federation, about their rights, about their status, and whether or not they were receiving the assistance they needed. As a result of this education, a group of Russian human rights defenders came to the conclusion that the situation of the AHISKA Turks in Russia have remained difficult over the 25 years since the dissolution of the USSR, that they have become involuntary victims of the breakdown of the empire and inter-ethnic conflicts. Now, another very significant aspect for Meskhetian Turks was accession by Georgia to the Council of Europe in 1999, when it took on the commitment to repatriate the Meskhetian Turks deported from Georgia in 1990. After a difficult process, a Repatriation Act was finally enacted in 2007, and yet in the territory of the region where there used to be 100,000 Meskhetian Turks who were deported, there's still only 30 families. And the repatriation law is something that only 6 individuals have been able to take advantage of out of 6,000 applicants. Now, in consideration with these 2 points, we would like to appeal to the High Commissioner for National Minorities of the OSCE to set up a special group with the participation of human rights defenders from Russia and Georgia, experts on the Meskhetian Turks, and our own representatives in order to monitor the situation in Russia and Georgia. Thank you.
To be later followed by the People's Friendship University, named after Alina Batyrova. Birduino, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I am a lawyer, advocate from Kyrgyzstan. When talking about inter-ethnic relations in Kyrgyzstan, we cannot leave out the question of Imjan Khaysara, a human rights defender from the south of the country. Part of his story began recently and you can see about this on our website. Berduino has issued a special brochure on this issue, but this makes my task a little easier. In the Human Rights Committee, having considered his case, noted the violation of the government of Kyrgyzstan of his right to due process, and thereby violating the International Covenant on human rights. During the investigation of the criminal case, was not allowed effective legal assistance. He was deprived of the right to humane treatment and the recognition of his human rights. Under arrest. In 2016, the Higher Court of the Kyrgyz Republic looked at the circumstances with regard to the communication from the UN Human Rights Committee and sent it once again to a lower court for consideration. And this will begin on the 4th. Here we need to note that the legal process of the Supreme Court was not subject to due process. There was hysteria and there were threats from certain people who were at the legal proceedings, including towards the lawyer of this human rights defender. This indicates that the authorities of Kyrgyzstan do not wish to assess the fact that during a consideration of a legal process from 2010, there was illegal detention and his human rights were not respected. What is proposed? The government of Kyrgyzstan is a participant to a number of treaties agreed on human rights and has adopted the responsibilities to implement them in the interest of this country. We would like to say that we are committed to these agreements, and this individual that I spoke of should be freed from his detention.
To the final speaker on our registered list of speakers. On behalf of the organization People's Friendship University, named after Alina Batyrova. The floor is yours.
Спасибо. Karbajan Batyrov from Kyrgyzstan. I'd just like to add some points about Askarov. In that particular criminal case, 8 individuals are in fact charged, and 5 of them actually present. Now, when the higher court overturned the decision, except for Askarov, the others were simply forgotten about, and nobody is invited to the hearings. I mean, as a lawyer, I just wanted to draw your attention to that point regarding the previous statement that we heard. Now, the representative of Kyrgyzstan in her statement really showed us the face of democracy in that country. And I find that extremely unfortunate. I mean, before saying such things, one really needs a hard look at how the authorities are fulfilling their recommendations given by international organizations. More than 200 recommendations have been submitted to the Human Rights Council of the United Nations, one of them on the elimination of racial discrimination. In February 2012, after the bloody events of June of 2010, where Uzbeks were victims. There were massive violations of their rights. This was filmed, it was shown, and these recommendations were fulfilled by October of this year. But Kyrgyzstan, as a very small country, received $300 million to fulfill these recommendations, but the result is 0. And just tomorrow, they'll have to report on this. Why did the president fall ill when he went to the National Assembly to this? Because Ban Ki-moon made a specific comment on this, and he said, you know, we want him to come and report on whether or not these recommendations have been fulfilled. So he fell ill, and he didn't get all the way to New York because he didn't have the facts he wasn't able to report to the international community. And they have nothing to report on, and that is why he started to change the constitution. He tried to take advantage of the situation in order to get out of that agreement. So I really think that Kyrgyzstan should no longer be a member of the. Thank you.
Registered interventions from the floor. I was informed that now the Ukrainian delegation would also like to raise a point of order. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The delegation of Ukraine raises a point of order in connection with the statements by the so-called spiritual direction of the Muslims of the Republic of Crimea and Sevastopol and the so-called regional Bulgarian national cultural autonomy of the Republic of Crimea. We condemn the provocative attempts to use the HDM for legitimization of the illegal occupation of Ukraine's autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol by bringing here the representatives of the NGOs conducting unlawful activities in the occupied Crimea. We find unacceptable that ODIHR registered as participants and the floor was given to the non-governmental organizations, the very title of which contain formulations that violate the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. We express our protest against such actions. As the speakers have claimed to be affiliated to the Republic of Crimea of the Russian Federation, it must be recalled that according to the international law and the OSCE founding principle, there is no such regional entity in Russia. Meanwhile, there are two Ukrainian regions which have been illegally occupied since 2014. We recall the need to strictly adhere to the UN General Assembly Resolution Territorial Integrity of Ukraine, calling upon all states, international organizations, and specialized agencies not to recognize any alteration of the status of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol on the basis of the so-called referendum of 16 March 2014, and to refrain from any action or dealing that might be interpreted as recognizing any such altered status. We reiterate our call on the chairmanship and the ODIHR to immediately prevent any attempt to misuse the HDM and to legitimize actions which are marked with flagrant violations of the OSCE founding principles. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was also asked to reiterate that ODIHR and the chairmanship fully support an adhere to the principle of freedom of association and freedom of expression, as well as to consensus-based decisions. This said, we now open the floor for the rights of reply of various delegations who have registered for taking the floor. We will first offer the floor to the Russian Federation because we believe that the session might slightly go over 1 p.m., at which point we will then probably lose the translation services. Therefore, we begin with the Russian Federation's right to
Делегация Российской Федерации.
The delegation of the Russian Federation would like to use the right to reply in order to respond to the intervention by a number of delegations. We would once again like to recall that the Warsaw Review is not authorized to consider issues with regard to the legal status of various territories. In this connection, we call on other delegations to focus on issues on the agenda of this meeting. Once again, we'd like to note that the joining of Crimea and Sevastopol with the Russian Federation was conducted fully in compliance with international law as a result of the realization of self-determination by the people of Crimea and Sevastopol. As regards the intervention by the representative of Georgia, we would like to invite our colleagues to recognize the spirit of independence in South Ossetia. However, some delegations are using this working session not for constructive work, but in order to address political aims. Thank you.
To the delegation of Turkey, to be later followed by the delegation of Albania. Turkey, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to respond to a number of issues, many of which, however, were also addressed during previous sessions. Firstly, Halki Seminary. Our government has the will to reopen Halki Seminary on the basis of a sustainable formula, and deliberations on this issue are underway. Next, the Patriarchate. Turkey pursues a constructive dialogue with the Patriarchate. The Greek Orthodox Patriarch himself openly praises the steps taken by the Turkish government with a view to meeting the requests of the minority. The procedures and principles regarding the election of the Patriarch are implemented with the traditions of the Patriarchate. In order to avoid any conflict with Turkish legislation in that connection, a total of 30 metropolitans who were synod members have been granted Turkish citizenship upon their request since 2010. As for the return of properties to minority foundations, we do effectively implement the law on foundations. In 2003, 433 properties have been re-registered in the name of Greek Orthodox foundations, and compensation was paid for 11 properties. Furthermore, as a result of positive steps taken by our government, a considerable number of Greek Orthodox minority members have already returned to Turkey, and we continue to take steps to boost this trend. And let me finally add that in recent years, many places of worship have been renovated, and many churches which had been closed to services for years have been reopened following restoration in Turkey. Thank you.
Thank you. We now offer the floor to the delegation of Albania, to be later followed by the delegation of Georgia. Albania, 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. In fact, I had not planned just to address this session in the morning, because I planned to address in the afternoon. But anyway, I took note from one of the so-called National Association Northern Epirus 1914 that touched the issue of the denigration of the Greek minority in Albania. In fact, well, these are stories that have been issued and have been addressed even last year and years ago, but with this kind of associations, which in fact for us not very active in Albania and do not cooperate with Albanian institutions, I could say that we are just compiling at present a very comprehensive law, special law on the minorities in Albania, just making Albania one of the fewest countries into the region with a comprehensive law. And in this respect, we are cooperating very closely with all the interested minority associations, with the academic circles, but even with the cooperation of the international institution, including the High Representative for National Minorities of the OSCE, with which we have to express our gratitude. So I guess that even the representative of the so-called Northern Epirus 1914 is going to realize these new realities in Albania and to meet and to see the work that is done into this respect. Thank you.
Thank you. We now offer the floor to the delegation of Georgia, to be later followed by Greece.
Thank you very much. In response to the accusations and issues raised by the NGO representatives from South Ossetia, I would like to respond that according to the latest 2014 census, the number of the whole population of Georgia was reduced and is reduced. And it refers to the ethnic minorities as well as to ethnic Georgians. As to the protection of the identity and culture of Ossetians, I would like to underline that public schools in the villages of Kakheti region of Georgia, where ethnic Ossetians reside compactly, state funds are allocated for teaching Ossetian language in public schools. Also at Tbilisi State University, there is a research center for Georgian Ossetian relations, which offers different educational programs for those who are interested to examine Georgian Ossetian relations. And it's also possible to take for free Ossetian language courses there. Also, I want to respond to the issue of the European Charter on Regional and Minority Languages and state that Georgia is actively engaged in the process of consideration of the Charter. We keep intensified analytical work to study the paragraphs of the Charter, and the awareness raising and information campaign on the Charter is underway. In parallel, Georgia protects and preserves the languages of ethnic minorities in different mechanisms. In particular, for many years, many of the paragraphs defined in the Charter, more than 35 paragraphs, are already under implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. We now offer the floor to Greece, to be followed by the delegation of Estonia.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. In reply to statements made by three NGOs, I would like to recall that any attempt to subsume Roma, Pomak and Roma members of the Muslim minority in Thrace under a Turkish identity which is not their own runs against the letter and the spirit of the OSCE principles that cannot be accepted. On freedom of association, tens of minority associations have been established, including an association in the title of which the word Turkish was used to denote the mother language of its members. On the right to education, we continue our policy of improving the functioning of the existing minority schools while successfully accommodating the preference to the public, non-minority educational system shown by the minority members who selected. There are also at least 57 public kindergartens in minority villages which minority children can attend before entering primary educational schools. Finally, regarding the case referred to in one NGO statement, I would like to point out that the measure of prohibition to enter the country's territory was neither related to the concerned person's personal identity, nationality, gender, religion, or beliefs, nor to any other ground covered by the OAC commitments. The full version of my right of reply will be uploaded later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll offer the floor to the delegation of Estonia, to be later followed by Canada. Estonia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We would like to reply to the statements of Russian Federation and Russian School in Estonia. The Estonian government considers process of integration of the society and promotion of Estonian citizenship as one of its priorities. It was alleged that citizens are not enjoying the same political, social, and cultural rights as citizens, which is not correct, with one small exception. They cannot participate in parliamentary elections, but all legal residents of Estonia have the right to vote in local governments. We were surprised about allegations that there is no access to Russian language media channels in Estonia. On the contrary, in September last year, the Russian language public broadcasting TV channel started to work. There are Russian language newspapers and a Russian language broadcasting radio station. As concerns the cases pending before the court mentioned here today, Supreme Court will make the final decision in these cases. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next, the floor goes to the delegation of Canada, to be followed by Latvia. Canada, the floor is yours.
Thank you, person. Although Canada's Indigenous peoples would not define themselves as a national minority, I would nonetheless like to use my right of reply to thank the Russian delegation for raising the important challenges that need to be addressed. Canada's government is committed to a renewed nation-to-nation relationship with Indigenous peoples built on the foundation of recognition, rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership based on the spirit of reconciliation. One element of this approach was the launch in August of this year of a national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Canada is also taking immediate action on root causes with investment on priorities including women's shelters, safe water, housing, education, and child welfare. Allow me to also state we are fully committed to implementing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And finally, in light of some of the comments that were made this morning, I take this opportunity to underscore that Canada does not and will not recognize Russia's illegal annexation of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. We continue to call for a resolution of the conflict in Ukraine with due regard to its territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders, and regret attempts to use this forum to undermine this essential Helsinki principle. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, the floor goes to the delegation of Latvia, to be followed by the Slovak Republic on behalf of the European Union. Latvia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Let me touch upon a couple of points raised in connection with Latvia. It seems some sources have misinformed those participants who have raised issues of mass statelessness in Latvia, since there are currently 178 stateless persons in Latvia, which is not a massive number. If it was about persons with the status of a non-citizen of Latvia, let me underline that they are not stateless persons, but persons with a special legal status of Latvia, and furthermore, scope of their rights exceeds those of stateless persons. Status is an interim one. All preconditions have been provided for these persons to easily acquire citizenship of Latvia through naturalization process. It was also rather awkward to hear about allegations on access to education in minority languages. Let me emphasize that even HCNM Madame Tors has highly assessed Latvia's experience with bilingual programs that are they are used by HCNM office as example of best practices for promoting multilingual education as a tool for integration. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, the floor goes to the Slovak Republic on behalf of the European Union, to be then followed by Croatia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and also in reply to comments made by representatives from civil society on issues related to the status of Crimea, I would like to say that the EU strongly condemns the illegal annexation of Crimea and Sebastopol to the Russian Federation and that we will not recognize it. We therefore regret the attempts by some participants of this meeting to use a legitimate opportunity for discussion and dialogue to make points relating to a situation that is in contradiction with the Helsinki principles. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, the floor goes to Croatia.
Since Croatia was mentioned in a statement made by the distinguished representative of the United States, I would like to respond. Diversity in all our society comes with corresponding challenges. No society is free from incidents of racism, discrimination, xenophobia, and intolerance. When it comes to tolerance and protection of minorities, Croatia has developed an advanced and comprehensive legal framework which guarantees the highest standards in the protection of minority rights. The government is committed to implement all relevant laws and international instruments of the protection of minority rights in their full extent. We strongly condemn any individual incidents which are not compatible with our values as defined by the Constitution. Building on the ideas and the very motto of the German chairmanship, national minorities bridge builder between societies, Croatia is very honored that the High Commissioner for National Minorities recognized our efforts during her recent visit to Croatia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, the floor goes to the delegation of Ukraine.
Уважаемый председатель,
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, to listen to the statements made by some participants here is extraordinary. They say things that have nothing to do with reality, with the truth, nothing to do with the consolidated experience of the international community with respect to Crimea. I mean, it's obvious to all that Crimea is occupied by the Russian Federation. This reference to the so-called referendum is meaningless. It is clear that this incursion by February of 2013 by the Russian armed forces into Ukrainian territory is a gross violation of the OSCE principles, and we call upon the institutions of the OSCE and the chairpersonship in office to bring an end to these actions that are so destructive for the OSCE principles. Thank you.
At this point, we have 3 more registered interventions by delegations. They will all be in English language, and therefore, with gratitude, we would like to, at this point, release the interpreters and thank them very much for their invaluable assistance. I'll continue with the delegation of the United States of America.
If a government has law enforcement concerns about a participant, HDIM is not the appropriate forum to deal with it. There are intergovernmental tools for law enforcement cooperation. Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, we want your participation. Walking out robs the rest of us of your government's perspective. It is not an effective way to respond to critics. We reiterate our condemnation of threats and harassment against human rights defenders. And finally, South Ossetia remains part of the internationally recognized territory of Georgia and Crimea, that of Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, the floor goes to the delegation of Poland.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I would like to thank the representative of the Ukrainian minority in Poland for raising the community's concerns related to hate crime incidents in Poland. I would like to, on behalf of the Polish state, I would like to assure you that the is committed to fighting all forms of hate crime. Every reported case is being prosecuted and brought to justice. Further, we would like to encourage all concerned to report every observed case to the relevant authorities so the case can be properly addressed. And also, using this opportunity, bring to your attention a side event that is organized on the initiative of the UK together with Poland, and the subject is tackling hate crimes. It will take place here after the session. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, the delegation of Lithuania will conclude the session.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I would like to exercise my right of reply regarding the remarks made by the Center for Research and Protection of Fundamental Rights. As regards the public yearly report on the risks to national security issued by the State Security Department of Lithuania, I would like to know that in this report, national minorities were definitely not portrayed as a threat to national security whatsoever. The threat indicated in the report relates to the separate entities which activities fuel confrontation within the Lithuanian society. Let me draw your attention that the Center for Research and Protection of Fundamental Rights, whose representative spoke earlier today, was reflected itself in this report as an NGO which is exclusively financed by Russia and which participated in pro-Russian propaganda campaigns directed against Lithuania's membership in EU and NATO. As regards the Lithuanian language exam for the national minorities, I would like to note that contrary to what has been said by the distinguished representative of the Center for Protection of Fundamental Rights, there is a transition period foreseen until 2018 for the application of this exam for the national minority pupils. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. There was one more delegation which registered for taking the floor. That was the delegation of Kyrgyzstan. Unfortunately, they are not here in the room, and as such, we regret that we cannot offer them the floor. This being said, we now conclude the first session of today. I'd like to thank once again our introducers, Mr. Villetson and Professor Moring, as well as all the participants who have actively participated in the discussion, and once again, thank you very much, and we also invite you to the next sessions of HDIM.